Hello there, and welcome to Science for Sleep, where curiosity slows down just enough to feel steady and calm. Tonight, we're going to wander into a part of your mind that works quietly every single day, whether you notice it or not. It's not a thought, or a memory, or even a feeling, but a tiny chemical messenger that shapes all of those things without asking for permission. Its name is cortisol, and it has a reputation that's both unfair and strangely deserved. Some call it the stress hormone, and they're not wrong, but it's also the reason you wake up in the morning. It's what keeps you alert in a pinch. It's the quiet hum of readiness in the background of your mind. And yet, when it lingers too long or works too hard, it can begin to change the very wiring of your brain. Before we get into that though, let me ask you something. How are you feeling right now? Not just in the ordinary way of answering fine, or tired, or busy, but really, how is your mind carrying itself this evening? Maybe you've had one of those days where the clock seemed to sprint ahead and your thoughts never caught up. Or maybe it was a slower day where even silence felt a little heavy. Either way, you're here now, and that's what matters. If you found your way to this quiet corner of the internet where science and sleep meet, then you probably wouldn't mind a reason to let your shoulders drop just a little. So if this slow drift through the hidden world of your brain feels like something you'd like to keep coming back to, it would mean a lot if you liked the video. Maybe subscribe. It helps others find this calm too, and if it helps you rest, that's really what this is for. So let's begin with a simple truth. Cortisol isn't out to get you. It isn't some villain hiding in the dark waiting to strike. It's part of a system that has been with us for millions of years, long before alarm clocks, before commutes, before emails. It was there, keeping our ancestors alive, a whisper in the bloodstream telling the body it was time to run, or to fight, or to stay very still in the tall grass. But in the modern world, that same whisper doesn't fade the way it used to. It lingers, like a song stuck in your head, and slowly it starts to reshape the way your brain thinks, feels, and even remembers. Think about the first moment of your morning, before the sun has fully stretched across the sky. Your brain is already at work. Long before you're fully awake, it releases cortisol in a sharp little peak, a built-in wake-up call. It's what clears the fog in your mind, what pulls you out of the soft weight of sleep, and nudges you into alertness. This is normal. In fact, it's healthy. That little burst is what helps you focus when you pour coffee, or check your phone, or glance out the window and remind yourself it's another day. Cortisol in that context is just part of being alive. It isn't stress, it's preparation. But cortisol has another side, and you've probably met it more often than you'd like. It's there when you get an unexpected email late at night, when your heart ticks faster than you'd prefer. It's there when you've got too many tabs open in your head, and one stubborn worry refuses to close. Each time this happens, the same ancient response that once saved your life in a dangerous world is switched on, and your brain doesn't care that there are no predators in sight. To it, the threat is real, because the signal feels the same. So cortisol flows, and your body follows. Over time, though, something interesting happens. The brain is not static. It changes, it rewires itself, it adapts to what it's exposed to, and cortisol is no exception. When the hormone rises too often for too long, the brain begins to reshape itself in subtle ways. The hippocampus, that part of your brain responsible for memory and learning, starts to thin just a little, as if the constant tide of stress wears down the shoreline. The amygdala, the alarm bell buried deep in your mind, becomes louder, more sensitive, quicker to shout. And the prefrontal cortex, the rational, calm planner that usually keeps everything in balance, starts to go quiet. Not silent, but softer, as if stress has been turning the volume knob down without asking. This is how cortisol doesn't just respond to stress. It teaches your brain to expect it. It rewires the circuitry in a way that makes you more vigilant, but also more anxious, more reactive, less able to stand back and see things clearly. You might notice it when you forget simple things, or when small problems feel larger than they are, or when sleep becomes restless because your brain seems convinced it has a night shift it can't clock out of. And none of this happens all at once. It's gradual, almost invisible, like a slow leak you only notice after the floor is already wet. The strange part is that this isn't a flaw in the system. It's the system doing exactly what it evolved to do. Your brain rewires itself for survival. And when cortisol is high, survival starts to look like constant alertness, even if it's exhausting. This is why modern stress feels so different from the kind our ancestors faced. Their stress came in sharp, short bursts, and then it was over. The lion either caught you, or it didn't. Ours is quieter. It comes in pings and deadlines and unanswered messages, and it doesn't end. So the brain keeps listening and adapting, even when that adaptation costs us our clarity. But here's the part that isn't talked about enough. This rewiring isn't permanent. The same brain that can learn stress can also unlearn it. The same pathways that grow sharp under pressure can soften again. Neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to change, never switches off. It only waits for the right signals. And if constant cortisol can carve stress into the mind, then calm, deliberate rest can lay new tracks in a different direction. You can almost picture it like a forest trail. Every time cortisol rises and your brain reacts, it's like walking the same path over and over until it's well worn and automatic. But paths can grow over if they're not used. New ones can be made too, even if they take time. And that's where the balance comes in, not in erasing cortisol, not in fighting it, but in understanding how it shapes the mind and how the mind can be reshaped in return. So tonight, as we sit here together tracing the quiet map of this hormone and what it does, it might help to remember that none of this is fixed. You're not locked into the circuitry that stress has drawn in the sound of your brain. Every moment of calm, every breath, every small pause is like a subtle redirection. It doesn't erase what stress has built, but it adds something else, a different route, a softer line. And if you're still here, listening, you've already begun it, whether you meant to or not. Your brain is paying attention to this slower rhythm. It's registering the difference between the sharp hum of cortisol and the steadier hum of quiet. It may not be dramatic, you won't feel a switch flip. But somewhere, deep down, your neurons are listening. And that is the quiet storm in your mind. Not just the one that stress brings, but the one that calm can bring too. And from here, we'll keep following it, because understanding cortisol isn't just about what it does in a single stressful moment. It's about how it became part of us, and why the brain listens so closely when it speaks. Every morning, before the world stirs fully awake, there's a quiet guest that arrives uninvited but entirely necessary. It's a hormone, and you've met it every single day of your life. You might not know its name, but it knows yours well, even if you don't always remember it. Cortisol, the silent greeter of your mornings, comes to work the moment you open your eyes. It is at your side, even before your first conscious thought, preparing you for the day ahead. If you think about the sunrise, you might picture the sky slowly becoming lighter, the soft hues of dawn spreading across the horizon. But as the sun rises, so too does cortisol. Its rhythm is tied to the natural rhythm of the earth, and in this sense it's not just a hormone, it's a part of nature's design, woven into the cycles of life. This rise of cortisol is what gets you out of bed. It's the signal your brain needs to begin the delicate process of waking up, and more than that, it prepares your body for the demands of the day. It works alongside your circadian rhythm, your internal body clock, that guides the flow of wakefulness and sleep. Your body is aware that it's time to step into a new cycle, and cortisol is the one who makes sure you're ready. Here's how it works. When you first wake up, your body is still in a kind of semi-sleep mode. You're not yet fully conscious of what's around you. Your thoughts haven't fully taken shape, but cortisol is already at work, helping to push your body through this transition from rest to activity. It's like a gentle nudge from the inside, helping to pull you out of the warmth of your blankets and into the world that's waiting outside your door. For many, cortisol's first act of the day is to boost energy levels, ensuring that you're ready to face whatever challenges lie ahead. It's not just about waking you up, it's about making sure your body's operating at peak performance, even if you don't yet realize it. The rise in cortisol triggers a cascade of other processes in your body. It increases your heart rate, your blood sugar levels rise, and your blood vessels constrict, all to ensure that you're equipped for action. These are the same mechanisms that once protected our ancestors in moments of danger. Cortisol helps you meet the world head-on, whether it's an early morning meeting or simply making sure you're awake enough to enjoy your first cup of coffee. The fascinating thing about cortisol's morning rise is how it works in tandem with the light around you. The circadian rhythm, which is controlled by the light entering your eyes, signals your brain to begin releasing cortisol. This natural synchronization ensures that you're in tune with the rising sun, helping to align your energy levels with the day's progression. It's a delicate dance between the environment and the body, one that has been perfected over millennia of evolution. As you move into the morning, cortisol remains by your side. For some, it's a steady companion, lifting their energy levels smoothly and evenly as the day unfolds. For others, however, the rise of cortisol can be a little too sharp, a little too much. This is especially true for those who start their day with anxiety or stress. The hormone doesn't just rise gently, it spikes, and suddenly, the day feels overwhelming before it's even truly begun. The gentle nudge turns into a loud alarm, and the body is filled with more energy than it knows what to do with. The stress response begins its course, and what was meant to be a simple wake-up call turns into an extended alertness that lingers far too long. And this, in many ways, is the paradox of cortisol. It's a necessary hormone, vital for life, but it doesn't always play nice when things aren't balanced. When it rises too quickly or remains elevated for too long, the body can begin to feel the effects of that overload. We see it in the form of a racing heart, an inability to focus, a nagging sense of worry that won't shake. What was meant to help you become alert becomes a source of distraction. What should be a smooth rise in energy can turn into an exhausting surge of stress. That's why, by the time you've reached your afternoon, you might feel a little worn down by the constant presence of cortisol. It has been there all along, from the moment you woke up, and it's still moving through you. But cortisol is more than just an alarm bell. It's a builder, a reminder, a regulator. It doesn't just help you wake up, it teaches you to adapt, to stay aware. This is why, in moments of stress, your body's ability to face the situation is rooted in the function of cortisol. The way it rushes in to give you energy isn't just a reaction, it's a learned process that helps you survive in a world full of unpredictability. But what happens when this response becomes more than just a morning ritual? What happens when cortisol doesn't fade after the initial rush? That's when things start to change. When cortisol hangs around too long, your brain and body start to adapt to that constant presence. The stress response becomes your new normal. It's no longer a temporary lift, but a constant hum in the background of your life, reshaping the way your brain works, the way it reacts, and the way it remembers. The issue with cortisol isn't the hormone itself, it's the way the body gets stuck in the pattern of reacting. When we're constantly stressed, we no longer have the time to return to a baseline of calm. And this means that, day by day, the ways our brains respond to the world around us get a little more sensitive, a little more reactive. Cortisol, rather than being a helpful nudge, turns into a constant presence, shaping our responses to even the smallest of challenges. And yet, as much as cortisol can be a disruptor, it's also a healer, because it's part of a delicate system that can be reset, if given the time and the tools. Your body can learn to find balance again, to release stress and return to calm. This isn't something that happens overnight, but it is possible. It's possible to learn to work with cortisol rather than letting it drive you. The balance is delicate, and it's one that requires patience and practice. It requires understanding that cortisol is not the enemy, but a signal, a messenger, and that in learning to listen to it more consciously, we can regain control over its influence. So the next time you wake up and feel that gentle rise of cortisol coursing through you, remember that it's not just a signal of stress. It's the body's reminder that you're alive, that your brain and body are in sync with the world around you, and that you have the ability to adapt, to survive, and to thrive in a world that is ever-changing. It's a message that comes every morning, quietly, gently, reminding you that you're ready for the day ahead. And if the day feels a little too heavy at times, well, that's okay too. It just means that your brain needs a little time to find its balance again. Cortisol is not new to the human experience. It has been a part of us since our earliest days, since before humans even existed as we know them. It has evolved with us, adapting to our changing world and to the demands of survival. In its earliest form, cortisol wasn't about board meetings or deadlines. It wasn't even about school or traffic jams. It was about survival in a world that was often as unforgiving as it was beautiful. And that's where we need to start. Back in a time when humans and their ancestors lived on the edge of danger every single day. Imagine a time, tens of thousands of years ago, when our early human ancestors roamed the earth alongside giant beasts. Woolly mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, and enormous bears. The world was a place where life and death were in constant competition. A single wrong step, a single moment of hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. And in this unforgiving world, cortisol was more than just a helpful hormone. It was a lifesaver. When early humans encountered a threat, say, a large predator looking for a meal, cortisol was the hormone that kicked in first. It didn't matter if you were hunting for food or simply walking through the forest. If you found yourself face to face with danger, cortisol was the first responder. It was like a silent alarm system, alerting your body to the danger that was ahead. The very moment you spotted a saber-toothed tiger, cortisol flooded your system, readying you for fight or flight. It did this in a very direct way, by increasing your heart rate, dilating your pupils, and tightening your muscles. Cortisol made sure that blood flowed to the places that needed it most, your muscles and your brain. It shut down systems that weren't essential to immediate survival, like digestion, and refocused your body's energy on responding to the threat. Everything in your body became a tool designed for one thing: survival. This is why cortisol has been so critical for human survival. It was designed for a specific purpose, and that purpose was to help us navigate a dangerous world. When the stakes were high, cortisol acted as the spark that fired up our bodies, getting us ready to act. If you were lucky enough to escape a predator or avoid danger, the cortisol response would eventually subside, and your body would return to its regular rhythms, letting you catch your breath. But there's an interesting shift here. The world we live in now is very different. We no longer have to worry about giant predators lurking in the shadows, but the threat response that cortisol triggers, the surge of energy, the heightened awareness, has not changed. And that's where the disconnect happens. Instead of encountering saber-toothed tigers, we encounter deadlines, stress at work, family pressures, and social media notifications. But the body doesn't know the difference. The ancient warning system that once protected us from physical danger now responds to the stresses of modern life, even if the danger is more abstract. Let's think about this for a second. Imagine sitting in a meeting at work, the clock ticking and the pressure mounting. Your brain senses the threat of deadlines, the pressure of performance, the possibility of failure. Cortisol rises in response, flooding your system with the same biochemical cocktail that once prepared you to face down a wild animal. Your heart rate increases, your focus sharpens, and your muscles tense. But unlike the early human response, there's no immediate escape from this pressure. The danger is not tangible, and yet the body reacts as if it were. This is the paradox of cortisol in the modern world. What was once a survival mechanism now becomes a constant companion, not because we're facing immediate physical danger, but because our brains are wired to respond to any form of stress with the same urgency. This is why cortisol has earned its reputation as the stress hormone. It wasn't designed to be used in small bursts over long periods of time. It was meant to prepare us for a moment of intense danger, after which it would settle down. But in today's world, the threats are more constant, less tangible, and more subtle, and cortisol has to keep working. Think about the last time you felt stressed. Perhaps it was a work deadline or a personal issue that was weighing on you. Did you feel your body react physically? Maybe your heart started to race, your breathing became shallow and you felt tense all over. That was cortisol at work. Your body was trying to prepare for something, even though the danger wasn't immediate. This is what makes the long-term effects of cortisol so insidious. When cortisol is activated frequently, day after day, it can have a profound impact on your body, and especially your brain. The stress response that cortisol triggers doesn't have an off switch when we're constantly under pressure. Over time, the effects of chronic cortisol can reshape the way the brain processes information, reacts to stress, and even how memories are formed. But, as we'll explore, this isn't a permanent change. The brain, though malleable, also has the ability to reset and adapt. It's just a matter of finding the balance. It's also worth noting that, just as cortisol can help us survive in a dangerous world, it can also be a force of destruction when it lingers too long. When cortisol continues to circulate at high levels, the body enters a state of chronic stress. In this state, the body remains on constant alert, and this leads to a series of physiological changes that can affect everything from your cardiovascular health to your immune system. Chronic stress becomes not just a mental burden, but a physical one as well. But here's the hopeful part. The same hormone that helps us survive in the moment also offers a way to navigate the challenges of modern life. Cortisol isn't inherently bad, it's part of a finely tuned system that ensures our survival. The key is in how we manage it. Just like ancient humans learned to adapt to their environment, we too can adapt to the challenges of our world. It's all about finding ways to reduce the constant flood of cortisol and bring the body back into balance. There's an interesting thing about the brain. It's always listening. Not just to the words people say, or the sounds that fill the room, but to the very subtle signals your body sends out. Every thought, every feeling, every small movement is tracked by your brain, processed and filed away in its vast network of memories and responses. This constant attention is what allows us to react to the world in real time, to make decisions, to learn from past experiences, and to adapt to our ever-changing environment. But what happens when your brain begins to listen too closely? When cortisol rises, whether it's in response to stress or just the natural rhythms of your day, your brain starts paying more attention. It starts listening not just to what's happening in the moment, but to every possible interpretation of what might happen next. It's as if cortisol flips a switch, turning your brain into an overly attentive listener. And this heightened attention, while it's useful when you need to be sharp, can quickly become a double-edged sword. The first way this affects you is through your focus. Imagine you're in a meeting, or perhaps even sitting quietly at home, when your mind suddenly becomes hyper-aware of everything going on around you. Every sound becomes sharper, every movement more noticeable. Your heart rate quickens, and you begin to focus on every little detail, no matter how small. Maybe your mind starts racing, thinking about everything you need to do next, or worrying about things you've said or done in the past. This heightened attention, driven by cortisol, is like turning up the volume on every signal your brain receives. While this heightened awareness can be helpful in certain situations, like when you're facing a real danger or when you need to be on your toes, when it becomes constant, it starts to have a different effect. Over time, this heightened attention can make you more anxious, more alert to potential threats, even when there's no immediate danger. It's as though your brain becomes overly cautious, waiting for something to go wrong, even when it's not necessary. This is where things can start to get tricky. Cortisol's influence doesn't just stop at physical responses like faster heart rates or muscle tension. It begins to affect how your brain processes information. When cortisol is constantly elevated, your brain starts to take note of everything. Your memories become more detailed, but often more emotionally charged. The brain's tendency to over-focus on potential threats can lead you to develop a kind of stress memory, a heightened awareness of negative experiences no matter how small. Small mistakes or failures feel bigger than they are, and they stay with you longer. When you're stressed, your brain shifts from a state of calm processing to a state of vigilance. This isn't just a temporary shift, it's a reprogramming of your neural pathways. Over time, your brain starts to prioritize danger, discomfort, and uncertainty. It begins to associate these things with increased focus, reinforcing the cycle of stress. When cortisol is constantly at play, this vigilant state becomes more than just a momentary response. It becomes a default mode for the brain. And suddenly, the things you once overlooked, the small stresses, the subtle worries, begin to occupy more of your attention, taking up mental space that could be used for other things. This tendency to focus too closely can also make it more difficult for you to relax. After all, relaxation requires letting go of focus, letting your brain wander without worrying about the consequences. But when cortisol is running the show, relaxation becomes harder to achieve. Your brain, trained to stay on alert, struggles to tune out the constant hum of worries. This is why you may find it difficult to wind down after a long day, or why sleep becomes harder to come by when you're stressed. Your brain is too busy listening for the next thing to worry about, and it's hard to shut that off. And it's not just about what's happening right now, it's about how your brain stores information for the future. When your brain listens too closely, it starts to remember not just the facts, but the emotions tied to those facts. It's as though your memories are being stamped with the emotional charge of cortisol. This is what makes moments of stress or anxiety feel much more intense in hindsight. Your brain doesn't just recall the event itself, it recalls the emotions attached to it, amplifying the intensity of the memory. And over time, this constant replaying of emotionally charged memories can lead to a kind of mental clutter, a heap of unresolved thoughts and feelings that your brain keeps pulling up over and over. This constant listening also affects how you perceive new experiences. When cortisol is high, your brain becomes more attuned to potential threats or discomforts in your environment. This can lead to an exaggerated response to new challenges. For example, you might find yourself overthinking social interactions or work tasks, reading into the smallest cues for signs of danger or disapproval. This kind of mental hypervigilance can create a loop of stress, as your brain continually searches for something to worry about, even when there's nothing to fear. It's important to understand that this hyper-awareness isn't something you consciously choose. Your brain isn't intentionally creating stress. It's simply responding to the signals it's receiving. The problem is that when cortisol is elevated for too long, this response becomes ingrained. It's no longer just a reaction to immediate danger, it becomes the lens through which you view the world. The more cortisol you experience, the more your brain listens for stress, making it harder to hear anything else. The good news is that this heightened focus is not permanent. Just as cortisol floods your system when you're stressed, it can be recalibrated. Your brain, like any other part of your body, is adaptable. But to find that balance, you need to give your brain the space it needs to reset, to stop listening so closely to the things that cause stress, and to start listening to the things that bring peace. Learning to calm this heightened focus is key to overcoming the long-term effects of stress. Practices like mindfulness, meditation, and deep breathing help to train the brain to focus on the present moment rather than on the perceived dangers lurking in the future. These practices help to counteract the effects of cortisol by shifting the brain away from its automatic stress response, creating a new default mode, one that's focused on calm, on balance, and on peace. When you allow your brain to step back from the constant listening, You give it the opportunity to process information without the overwhelming influence of cortisol. Over time, this can help to create new pathways in the brain, pathways that prioritize relaxation, clarity, and emotional regulation. The key here is not to eliminate cortisol entirely, because that would be impossible and unnecessary. Cortisol plays a vital role in keeping us alert and prepared for danger. But when your brain starts to listen too closely, when cortisol is raised too frequently or for too long, it begins to distort your perceptions. It's like having the volume turned up too high. Everything becomes louder, more intense, and harder to manage. The trick is learning how to lower that volume to help your brain find a more balanced, peaceful state of listening. As we continue, we'll explore how stress, when left unchecked, can affect the very way we think, feel, and remember. But remember, the brain's ability to change is always there, waiting for the right cues. It's just a matter of finding the right path to calm. The hippocampus is a small seahorse-shaped structure deep within your brain, nestled just behind your temples. It's not a part of the brain that gets a lot of attention, at least not in casual conversation. But this little organ plays a monumental role in shaping how you experience the world. It's the center of memory, the place where your brain processes and stores new experiences. The hippocampus helps you form short-term memories, then convert them into long-term ones. It also plays a key role in spatial navigation, helping you find your way, whether you're driving home from work or remembering where you left your keys. But when cortisol rises, when stress takes hold, the hippocampus becomes a battlefield. What was once a peaceful, orderly space of memory formation and recall becomes a place under siege as the brain prioritizes survival over recollection. And this isn't just a temporary glitch, it's a pattern that begins to shape the way your brain functions over time. The hippocampus, under the pressure of chronic cortisol, begins to shrink, and its ability to store and retrieve memories is affected. The brain's natural balance is disturbed, and the memories that were once clear and accessible become hazy, elusive, or even hard to recall entirely. The hippocampus is particularly vulnerable to the long-term effects of stress. Unlike other parts of the brain that are more resistant to change, the hippocampus is especially sensitive to the changes cortisol brings. Over time, with sustained cortisol levels, this area of the brain can start to lose its effectiveness. The process is slow, like water wearing down stone, but the effects are real. The hippocampus begins to shrink, and as it does, its ability to create new memories and access old ones becomes increasingly compromised. This explains why, when we're under chronic stress, we often feel like our memory isn't as sharp as it used to be. Small details, names, dates, places become harder to recall. Tasks that once felt simple to organize and complete start to feel overwhelming, as though the pieces of information we once had neatly arranged in our minds are now scattered and jumbled. When cortisol continually floods the brain, it's not just the body that suffers, it's the very way we process the world around us. There's something counterintuitive about this. Cortisol, which was once designed to help us remember important threats in our environment, like the sound of a predator approaching, now makes it harder for us to remember the things that keep us grounded in our everyday lives. The stress response that cortisol triggers was supposed to help us survive, to make us more aware of potential dangers, and to keep us focused on what mattered in moments of high stakes. But in the modern world, where dangers are less immediate and often more psychological, that same response works against us, especially in the hippocampus. When your brain is in a constant state of alert, that heightened awareness can cloud the ability to think clearly and make sense of everyday events. Memories begin to fade or get jumbled because the brain is hyper-focused on the stressor at hand, not on organizing and storing the information it's being given. Instead of creating coherent, reliable memories, the hippocampus becomes more like a flooded filing cabinet, disorganized, chaotic, and hard to access. And this doesn't just affect short-term memory, it starts to spill over into long-term memory too. When the hippocampus is under siege, your brain's ability to form new, long-lasting memories is impaired. It becomes more difficult to learn new things, whether it's remembering the new details of a project at work or recalling the name of someone you just met. It's not that your brain isn't trying, it's just that the environment it's working within is one of constant stress, and that makes memory formation harder than it should be. This explains why so many people who are under chronic stress often report feeling like they're losing their edge. Tasks that were once easy to manage now seem overwhelming. The ability to think clearly, to recall important details, and to stay organized starts to slip away. The hippocampus, which was once an efficient memory processor, begins to lose its edge too, and the whole system starts to feel like it's moving in slow motion. But here's where the story starts to change. The brain, as complex and delicate as it is, also has an incredible capacity for recovery. Just as the hippocampus can shrink under chronic stress, it can also grow back. This process is known as neurogenesis, the brain's ability to create new neurons and repair itself. The hippocampus, with the right interventions, can regenerate and restore its ability to create memories and process information efficiently. So how do we heal the hippocampus? How do we help it recover from the damage caused by chronic stress and cortisol? The first step is recognizing the power of recovery. The brain's ability to change is inherent. It just needs the right environment. And the first change often starts with lowering cortisol levels, which can be achieved through practices like mindfulness, meditation, deep breathing, and even physical exercise. These activities don't just help reduce stress, they help to reset the body's internal balance, giving the hippocampus the chance to recover from the damage that prolonged cortisol exposure has caused. Sleep is another essential part of this recovery process. It's during deep sleep, when the body and mind are resting, that the hippocampus is most likely to repair itself. Quality sleep is necessary for memory consolidation, which is why it's so crucial for those under chronic stress to focus on improving their sleep habits. When we sleep, the brain isn't just resting. It's actively restoring the processes that help us retain and recall memories. Giving the hippocampus the chance to rest during these cycles is key to its regeneration. And perhaps the most important factor in helping the hippocampus recover is allowing time for calm to return to the mind. Cortisol has a tendency to flood the system, creating a constant sense of urgency and panic. By allowing your brain to experience moments of calm, whether through relaxation, quiet reflection, or even creative outlets, you help to retrain the brain. The hippocampus can begin to rebuild, just as muscles rebuild after they've been stressed or strained. The key takeaway here is this: cortisol, while essential in moments of acute stress, doesn't need to dominate our lives. By learning how to manage stress and give our brains the space to recover, we can ensure that our hippocampus continues to function optimally, supporting our memory, our learning, and our ability to navigate the world with clarity. The brain is not a static organ. It's ever-changing, ever-adapting, and ever-responding to the world around us. By finding balance in the face of stress, we can ensure that the hippocampus remains a powerful, reliable part of that process. Memory, the act of recalling experiences, details, and moments, is something we often take for granted. We store information like a well-organized library, carefully cataloguing each experience, each piece of knowledge, into the compartments of our brain. We rely on memory every day, from remembering someone's name to recalling how to get home or remembering a moment of joy. But when stress takes hold, memory becomes like water slipping through your fingers, elusive and unpredictable, no matter how hard you try to grasp it. The hippocampus, that tiny organ deep in your brain, is supposed to be the keeper of these memories. It is the place where information goes to be stored and processed. It's where the past is kept, organized, structured, accessible. But when cortisol surges, when stress rises too high, the hippocampus starts to change. the very process of forming and storing memories becomes impaired. What was once easy, second nature, becomes difficult to grasp. You've probably experienced this yourself. You walk into a room and immediately forget why you're there, or you try to recall a name and it's just out of reach, no matter how hard you try. These moments, small as they may seem, are the result of your brain being in a constant state of stress. Cortisol, that hormone linked with stress, has a direct effect on your ability to encode and retrieve memories. When cortisol floods your system, it doesn't just ramp up your body's fight or flight response. It interferes with the brain's ability to process information. Think about it for a moment. When we're stressed, we're focused on survival. The brain is constantly scanning for threats, trying to keep us safe, even in situations that no longer require the kind of vigilance our ancestors needed. As cortisol rises, the brain shifts its priorities. It becomes less focused on processing memories and more focused on dealing with the immediate threat, whether it's a deadline, a tough conversation, or a worry that simply won't go away. The hippocampus is pushed aside, its role diminished in the face of what the brain perceives as more pressing concerns. This is a survival mechanism that in the past made perfect sense. When you were running from danger or needed to react quickly, it didn't matter that you might forget where you left your tools or what time your meeting was. What mattered was that you could react quickly, make decisions fast, and stay alive. Your brain was designed for moments of high stress and quick response, but today, in our modern world, that same mechanism is often triggered by things that don't involve physical danger. Things like anxiety, social pressure, or work stress. And when cortisol floods your system, it's the hippocampus that suffers. So why does memory slip through your fingers when stress is high? It's because the brain becomes overwhelmed by the hormone's effects. When cortisol levels remain elevated for prolonged periods, the hippocampus begins to shrink. This isn't an immediate effect, but it's a long-term consequence of chronic stress. And as the hippocampus shrinks, its ability to process and store new information diminishes. You might notice it most when you're stressed out, like when you forget where you parked your car or can't remember what you were about to say mid-sentence. These memory lapses are the result of stress hijacking the system that's meant to keep everything organized. But the effects of cortisol on memory aren't just about forgetfulness in the short term. Over time, these lapses become more pronounced. Chronic stress doesn't just impair your ability to remember new things, it also affects your long-term memories. Stress can distort past memories, making them seem more intense or more negative than they might have been at the time. This is a byproduct of the brain's natural tendency to focus on perceived threats. When you're stressed, your brain is far more likely to replay moments of discomfort or conflict, giving them more mental weight than they might deserve. Interestingly, cortisol doesn't just make it harder to remember specific things, it also disrupts the way we recall events. You've probably experienced the feeling of trying to recall something, only to realize that the memory doesn't feel as clear as it once did. It's like the picture is out of focus, the details blurred. This phenomenon happens when stress interrupts the brain's ability to form coherent memories. Instead of forming a clear, structured memory of an event, your brain stores the experience in a fragmented way, making it harder to recall later. This kind of memory disruption is one of the reasons that stress can feel like it's constantly draining your cognitive resources. The more stressed you are, the harder it becomes to remember things with clarity. The brain, under the influence of cortisol, is simply not functioning at its best. And the problem compounds over time. When you add chronic stress to the mix, it becomes more difficult for your brain to perform tasks that were once automatic, like remembering your keys, a friend's name, or the directions to a new place. But there's hope. Just as cortisol can negatively impact the brain, it is also possible to undo some of its effects. The brain has a remarkable capacity for recovery, and with the right interventions, the damage done to the hippocampus and the memory systems can be reversed. This isn't something that happens overnight, but small changes in your lifestyle, mindset, and habits can make a significant difference. Reducing stress is the first step. The less cortisol your body produces, the less your hippocampus is affected. Practices like mindfulness, meditation, and physical exercise can help lower cortisol levels, giving the brain the chance to reset. By taking the time to unwind, to rest, and to relax, you allow your brain to shift from survival mode to a more balanced, calm state. This shift allows the hippocampus to function as it was intended, processing memories and organizing information. Sleep is another key element in restoring memory. It's during deep sleep that the brain consolidates memories, making them more accessible and easier to recall. Quality sleep, then, is essential for memory restoration. This is why chronic stress can lead to disrupted sleep patterns, which in turn makes memory problems worse. If you can improve your sleep habits, you'll be giving your brain the space it needs to heal and recover. There's also a need to retrain the brain to focus on positive, calming experiences. Stress often causes the brain to latch onto negative memories or worst-case scenarios. By consciously focusing on the positive, through practices like gratitude journaling, positive affirmations, or simply taking time to appreciate the good moments in life, you can help reshape the way your brain processes information. This rewiring of neural pathways allows for a healthier, more balanced way of remembering and responding to the world around you. The truth is, memory doesn't have to slip through your fingers, not permanently. Cortisol may disrupt your ability to recall things in the short term, but with time, care, and practice, your brain can recover. It can rebuild the pathways that were once disrupted by stress. You can regain your sharpness, your clarity, and your sense of organization. In the end, it's not just about fighting stress, it's about learning to live with it, manage it, and allow your brain to rest and reset when needed. Your memory, your clarity, and your peace of mind are within your reach. All it takes is understanding the way stress affects your brain, and then taking steps to restore balance and calm. The amygdala is often described as the brain's alarm system, and for good reason. It's small, just about the size of a small almond, but it carries a big responsibility. Deep within your brain, the amygdala is responsible for processing emotions, particularly fear. It helps you respond to threats, sending signals to the body to prepare for action. When something feels dangerous or uncertain, the amygdala kicks in, alerting the body to react. This is the brain's fight or flight response, and it's essential for survival. However, what happens when the amygdala becomes too sensitive, when it starts reacting to every little trigger as though it's a life or death situation? That's when the alarm bell rings constantly, even when there's no real danger. The amygdala, when activated by stress, becomes an overactive watchdog, always on high alert, scanning for threats in every corner of life. This constant activation can create a cascade of problems, especially when cortisol is involved. When stress hormones flood the system, the amygdala becomes more reactive, and what was once a useful system for surviving immediate danger turns into a source of chronic anxiety, tension, and even emotional overwhelm. The amygdala's role in the body's stress response is straightforward. When it detects a potential threat, it signals other parts of the brain to prepare for action. It sends signals to the hypothalamus, which triggers the release of cortisol and adrenaline, your body's primary stress hormones. These hormones prepare you to either fight or flee the danger at hand. The heart rate quickens, blood flows to your muscles, and your senses heighten. It's an adaptive system that's helped humans survive for millennia. But in the modern world, this system is often misfiring. The stress we experience today isn't usually life-threatening. Instead, it's the steady drip of deadlines, work pressure, social media, and personal worries. And yet the amygdala responds in much the same way it would if a tiger were approaching. The body goes into full alert mode, even though the perceived danger isn't a physical threat, it's a psychological one. Cortisol surges, the body reacts, and the brain goes into a hypervigilant state. This overactivity in the amygdala can have profound effects on how we perceive and process emotions. The amygdala's job is to prioritize what's important. In a calm state, it can assess situations with balance, deciding which experiences are worth focusing on. But when cortisol is in play, the amygdala starts to distort that assessment. It amplifies negative emotions and minimizes positive ones, causing the brain to focus on perceived threats rather than neutral or positive experiences. This is why, under chronic stress, we may find ourselves ruminating on negative thoughts, feeling constantly on edge, or overreacting to small inconveniences. It's the amygdala's overactive response to stress that is driving these feelings. A good example of this is how we react to social situations. Under normal circumstances, we might have a fleeting thought about a social interaction, or worry briefly about what we said during a conversation. But when the amygdala is overstimulated, this worry can become an obsession. We begin to replay conversations in our heads, searching for any sign that we might have said something wrong or offended someone. Our minds race, amplifying the situation in ways that might feel much bigger than it really is. This is the amygdala on high alert, creating a kind of emotional feedback loop that keeps us locked in a state of anxiety. The impact of an overactive amygdala goes beyond just heightened anxiety. It can also distort our perception of the world. When the amygdala is overly active, it can make us more prone to interpreting neutral situations as threatening. Something as simple as a passing glance or a delayed response to a text can be perceived as rejection or criticism. This pattern of thought can become ingrained over time, making us more sensitive to perceived slights or dangers even when they don't exist. It's as if the amygdala is constantly primed to see the world through a lens of fear, and it's hard to remove those glasses once they've been put on. Even more concerning, the amygdala's overactivity can impact memory. The amygdala doesn't just process emotions, it plays a crucial role in how memories are formed. When the amygdala perceives something as a threat, it heightens the emotional intensity of that experience, making it more likely to be stored as a vivid memory. The problem arises when the amygdala begins to amplify the emotional response to things that aren't actually dangerous. This can lead to memories that are more intense or negative than the actual experience. The brain begins to associate certain triggers with fear, and those associations can stay with you long after the actual threat is gone. In this way, an overactive amygdala can create lasting emotional scars. Traumatic events, or even ongoing stress, can be stored in the brain in ways that make them feel as though they happened recently, even if years have passed. This is why some people experience heightened emotional responses or flashbacks to past events, even when those events are no longer relevant. The amygdala's imprint on memory can create a powerful connection between past stress and current emotional reactions. Fortunately, there is hope. Just as the brain is capable of overreacting to stress, it is also capable of healing from it. By addressing the root cause of the overactive amygdala, chronic stress, individuals can begin to retrain their brains and restore balance. Practices like mindfulness, meditation, and deep breathing are incredibly effective at helping to calm the amygdala and lower cortisol levels. These techniques teach the brain to shift from a state of hypervigilance to one of calm, helping the amygdala return to its normal state of awareness. It's like turning down the volume on a constantly blaring alarm bell, allowing the brain to process emotions in a healthier, more balanced way. Physical exercise also plays a role in calming the amygdala. Exercise helps to release tension in the body and clears out stress hormones, including cortisol. It doesn't have to be intense exercise. Gentle activities like walking, yoga, or even stretching can help calm the body and reset the brain. By moving the body, you're telling the brain that there's no immediate threat, giving the amygdala a chance to reset its response. Another effective way to calm the amygdala is by focusing on emotional regulation. This involves acknowledging your emotions without letting them control your reactions. The practice of emotional regulation helps you step back from the immediate rush of anxiety or fear, allowing you to assess a situation with greater clarity. Over time, this helps to retrain the amygdala, teaching it that not every situation is an emergency. The bottom line is this: the amygdala is not inherently bad. It's a vital part of your brain that helps you respond to danger, but when it's overactive, it can make the world feel like a constant threat. By learning how to calm the amygdala and manage stress, you can create a more peaceful, balanced relationship with your emotions, allowing the alarm bell to ring less frequently and with less intensity. The prefrontal cortex is often considered the brain's executive office, the seat of higher-level functions like decision-making, problem-solving, planning, and self-control. This area of the brain helps us navigate complex situations, weigh consequences, and make thoughtful, reasoned decisions. It's the part of your brain that holds everything together, helping you manage day-to-day responsibilities while simultaneously thinking ahead and planning for the future. But when stress takes hold, the prefrontal cortex is often the first to suffer. Imagine for a moment a major life decision. Perhaps it's deciding whether to accept a new job, how to navigate a tricky relationship, or what to do when you're facing a challenging situation. The prefrontal cortex helps you consider all the options, weighs the potential outcomes, and guides you toward a rational choice. It's what enables us to act with foresight, to plan ahead, and to consider both the short-term and long-term consequences of our actions. However, stress, especially chronic stress, has a way of hijacking this sophisticated decision-making process. When cortisol floods the brain in response to stress, the prefrontal cortex takes a back seat to the more primal parts of the brain, like the amygdala, which drives our fight-or-flight responses. The result? We become less able to think clearly, more impulsive, and far more likely to make decisions based on emotions rather than reason. This hijacking process is often referred to as cognitive narrowing. When the brain is under stress, the prefrontal cortex becomes less engaged in managing your thoughts, and the brain's emotional center, the amygdala, takes control. The amygdala, in all its emotional reactivity, is primarily concerned with immediate survival. It doesn't care about the long-term consequences of a decision, or whether you'll regret your actions later. It just wants to react in the present moment, focusing only on the potential threat in front of you. And when stress is present, the prefrontal cortex can't compete with the urgent impulses of the amygdala. The result? A brain that is less able to manage emotions, plan effectively, and consider the long-term impact of decisions. This is why stress often leads to impulsive decisions that are driven by fear, anxiety, or the overwhelming need to escape a stressful situation. When we're stressed, we're more likely to snap at a loved one, make hasty choices, or indulge in unhealthy behaviors because the part of our brain that normally helps us pause, reflect, and evaluate consequences is sidelined. The more we experience stress, the more this pattern becomes ingrained. Over time, we start to operate on a kind of autopilot, reacting to life's challenges in ways that don't reflect our true, thoughtful selves. In many ways, this is a survival mechanism. The brain is designed to protect you in moments of danger. If you're faced with a life-threatening situation, like being in the presence of a predator, the body doesn't have time to deliberate. It needs to act quickly, either fight the threat or run away from it. This was essential for our survival as early humans, where every moment could bring a life or death challenge. The amygdala's instinctual, immediate response was often the right one. But in today's world, where we don't face the same physical dangers, this quick response system can backfire. The brain still reacts as though the threat is immediate, even when the threat is something as seemingly harmless as a deadline or an uncomfortable conversation. The hijacking of the prefrontal cortex is particularly evident in moments of heightened emotional stress. When stress becomes chronic, the prefrontal cortex starts to lose its ability to regulate and control emotions effectively. You might find yourself more reactive, more prone to outbursts or rash decisions. This is because the emotional circuits in the brain are dominating, leaving less room for the logical, reasoned thinking that the prefrontal cortex provides. This effect can become even more pronounced when stress is ongoing. If cortisol levels remain elevated for extended periods, the prefrontal cortex begins to shrink slightly, weakening its function over time. This means that your ability to focus, think critically, and make good decisions decreases the longer you're exposed to high levels of stress. The brain, in its effort to prioritize survival, has shifted resources away from long-term planning and rational decision-making to short-term emotional responses. But here's the important thing. This doesn't have to be permanent. Just as the brain can become overwhelmed by stress, it can also recover. The prefrontal cortex has the ability to repair itself over time, given the right conditions. When cortisol levels drop and the brain is given a chance to rest and reset, the prefrontal cortex can regain its strength. This is where the concept of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself and form new connections, becomes critical. With the right interventions, such as mindfulness practices, exercise, and stress management techniques, the brain can be retrained to restore its balance. A significant part of this recovery process involves actively reducing stress. Mindfulness, meditation, and deep breathing exercises can help lower cortisol levels, allowing the prefrontal cortex to function more effectively. By engaging in these practices, we can strengthen the prefrontal cortex's ability to manage emotions and make decisions. Regular physical exercise is another way to support the prefrontal cortex. It not only reduces stress, but also helps to stimulate the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, a protein that supports the growth of new neurons and the health of existing ones. These activities help to re-establish the balance between the emotional and rational centers of the brain, giving the prefrontal cortex the space it needs to take charge again. One of the most effective ways to support your prefrontal cortex is through conscious effort to slow down. In a fast-paced world, we're often tempted to act quickly and impulsively, especially when under stress. But taking a moment to pause, breathe, and reflect before responding can make a world of difference. When you take a step back, the prefrontal cortex is better able to regain control and assess the situation logically. This moment of pause gives the brain the chance to activate its higher functions, rather than being swept away by the emotional current that cortisol creates. Stress management isn't just about avoiding or escaping stress. It's about developing resilience in the face of it. The prefrontal cortex can become more resilient over time, learning how to deal with stress in a way that allows you to stay grounded, focused, and clear-headed. It's about finding that balance between emotional and rational thinking, allowing your brain to respond to stress in a way that supports your long-term well-being. In the end, the prefrontal cortex is your brain's greatest tool for navigating life's complexities. When stress hijacks it, it can feel like you're no longer in control, like everything is happening too quickly and you can't keep up. But by taking proactive steps to manage stress, you can restore the power of your prefrontal cortex, allowing it to once again guide you through life's decisions with clarity and confidence. Cortisol is often described as the body's stress hormone, but it doesn't just spike during moments of acute stress. It also lingers, quietly affecting our bodies and minds over the long term. This slow burn of chronic cortisol can be insidious, creeping into the corners of our lives and gradually eroding the balance we need to thrive. Unlike the sharp surge of cortisol that floods the body in response to an immediate threat, chronic cortisol is the slow, steady drip of stress that remains in the background, constantly influencing the way we feel, think, and behave. At first, it may seem harmless. After all, cortisol is designed to be helpful. It's a hormone that readies us for action, makes sure we're alert, and helps us navigate the challenges of life. But when cortisol is consistently elevated, when it stays in the bloodstream longer than it should, it becomes a different kind of force, one that works against us rather than with us. This is the slow burn of chronic cortisol, and it's one of the most pervasive and damaging effects of ongoing stress. The problem with chronic cortisol is that it doesn't act like a single, isolated event. It's a prolonged exposure that wears down the body over time. When cortisol levels stay elevated, the body's systems begin to feel the strain. It's as though the body is constantly being asked to stay on high alert, even when there is no immediate danger. And the longer this goes on, the more difficult it becomes for the body to return to a state of calm. One of the first areas to feel the effects of chronic cortisol is the immune system. Normally, cortisol helps regulate inflammation in the body and ensures that the immune system functions properly. But when cortisol is continuously elevated, the immune system becomes compromised. It's like a worker being asked to work overtime without rest. The immune system can no longer perform at its optimal level, making you more susceptible to infections, illness, and chronic conditions. Your body, under the influence of cortisol, becomes less capable of fighting off illness, and this makes it harder to stay healthy in the long term. The cardiovascular system is another area that is impacted by chronic cortisol. Prolonged exposure to cortisol has been linked to an increased risk of high blood pressure, heart disease, and other cardiovascular issues. When cortisol is constantly active, it causes the heart to work harder than it should, and it affects the blood vessels, causing them to become stiffer and less responsive. Over time, this leads to an increased risk of heart problems. The slow burn of chronic cortisol is like a constant pressure on the cardiovascular system, one that doesn't let up and doesn't give the body a chance to recover. Beyond the body's physical systems, chronic cortisol also impacts the brain. As we've already seen, cortisol can impair the function of the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for memory and learning, but the effects of chronic cortisol extend beyond just memory. The prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for decision-making and emotional regulation, is also negatively affected by prolonged cortisol exposure. This can lead to difficulties in managing emotions, making decisions and thinking clearly. The slow burn of cortisol dulls the brain's ability to focus, leading to feelings of mental fog and exhaustion. And just like the immune system and the cardiovascular system, the brain doesn't have a chance to reset when cortisol is always present. Perhaps most troubling is the impact that chronic cortisol has on our emotional well-being. It's not just that stress feels overwhelming, it's that the constant presence of cortisol creates a sense of unease, even when there's no immediate source of stress. This is why people who are chronically stressed often feel like they're living in a constant state of tension. The body's nervous system remains on high alert, even during moments of rest. It's like trying to relax with the brakes on. The slow burn of cortisol creates a sense of unease, a feeling that something isn't quite right, even when everything in your environment appears calm. This feeling of unease is often coupled with mood disorders, such as anxiety and depression. The longer cortisol is elevated, the more likely it is to contribute to these emotional imbalances. Cortisol can interfere with the brain's production of serotonin, dopamine, and other chemicals that regulate mood. Over time, this can lead to a diminished sense of well-being, making it harder to feel joy, contentment, or motivation. The brain, under the influence of chronic cortisol, starts to lose its ability to regulate emotions, leading to feelings of hopelessness, irritability, and emotional numbness. The physical and emotional effects of chronic cortisol are not something that can be easily fixed with a quick break or a weekend getaway. The slow burn of cortisol is a pattern, a cycle that builds over time and becomes deeply ingrained in the body and mind. But the good news is that just as cortisol can build up in the body, it can also be reduced. The process of resetting cortisol levels and restoring balance to the body and mind is gradual, but it is entirely possible. One of the most effective ways to manage chronic cortisol is through mindfulness and relaxation techniques. Practices like meditation, deep breathing, and yoga can help lower cortisol levels by activating the body's parasympathetic nervous system, the system responsible for rest and digestion. By engaging in these practices regularly, you send signals to the brain that it is safe to relax, allowing cortisol levels to drop. Over time, this helps break the cycle of chronic stress and gives the body and mind the chance to heal. Exercise is another powerful tool in the battle against chronic cortisol. Physical activity helps to reduce cortisol levels by releasing endorphins, the brain's natural mood boosters. Regular exercise also promotes better sleep, which is essential for managing stress. Sleep is when the body and brain reset, and if cortisol levels remain high during sleep, the recovery process is interrupted. By exercising regularly and ensuring you're getting enough rest, you give your body the tools it needs to reduce stress and reset cortisol levels. Nutrition also plays a role in managing cortisol. Foods that are high in sugar and processed carbohydrates can spike cortisol levels, while a balanced diet rich in whole foods, healthy fats, and protein can help stabilize hormone levels. Certain nutrients such as vitamin C, magnesium, and omega-3 fatty acids have been shown to help reduce cortisol levels and support overall health. By fueling your body with the right nutrients, you give it the best chance to cope with stress and manage cortisol more effectively. Finally, social connection and support are vital in managing chronic stress. Isolation can amplify feelings of stress and anxiety, while meaningful connections with friends, family, or even support groups can help buffer the effects of stress. Talking about your stress, sharing experiences, and receiving emotional support can help regulate cortisol levels and reduce the negative effects of chronic stress on the body. The slow burn of chronic cortisol doesn't have to dominate your life. By understanding how cortisol affects the body and mind, and by taking proactive steps to manage it, you can restore balance and regain control. Cortisol is not inherently harmful. It's only when it lingers too long that it becomes a problem. By learning to manage stress, prioritize self-care, and create a healthy balance, you can lower cortisol levels and reduce its impact on your life. Sleep is one of the most basic and essential functions of the human body. It's the time our bodies use to heal, our minds use to rest, and our brains use to sort through the information of the day. Yet, for many of us, sleep has become a luxury, something we chase rather than something we naturally experience. The quality of our sleep often suffers when stress is at its peak, and the consequences can be more profound than simply feeling tired the next day. When cortisol is high, sleep can be elusive, and this lack of rest sets off a vicious cycle that becomes increasingly difficult to break. This cycle doesn't just affect how well we sleep, it affects the very systems in our body that are designed to keep us healthy and functioning optimally. Think about the last time you lay down to sleep after a particularly stressful day. Perhaps you found yourself tossing and turning, your mind racing with worries about what you had to do tomorrow, or regrets about things that had already happened. You might have found it hard to unwind, your body physically exhausted, but your mind unwilling to let go. Cortisol, the stress hormone, is at the heart of this issue. As cortisol surges, it signals to the body that something is amiss, that danger is imminent and you need to stay alert. The problem is, once cortisol is elevated, it's almost impossible for the body to settle into a restful state. The body's internal clock, known as the circadian rhythm, is intricately tied to cortisol levels. Cortisol rises naturally in the morning to help us wake up and feel alert, and it starts to dip in the evening as we prepare to sleep. This natural rhythm helps us stay in sync with the day-night cycle of the Earth, ensuring that we feel awake during the day and drowsy at night. But when stress takes hold, cortisol levels remain elevated long into the night. This throws off the body's circadian rhythm, making it harder to fall asleep and stay asleep. When cortisol remains high at night, it doesn't just prevent you from falling asleep, it also disrupts the quality of the sleep you do get. Studies have shown that high cortisol levels lead to more fragmented sleep, meaning you wake up more frequently throughout the night. This is why you might find yourself waking up in the middle of the night with a racing heart, unable to get back to sleep. Your body is still in a stress response mode, even though you're lying in bed trying to relax. Your brain is still processing stress, and cortisol is keeping you alert, preventing the deep restorative sleep that is essential for your overall well-being. This disrupted sleep has far-reaching consequences. Sleep is not just a time for rest, it's when the body performs critical repair and restoration processes. During deep sleep, the body repairs muscles, strengthens the immune system, and consolidates memories. The brain also detoxifies, clearing out harmful waste products that build up during the day, But when you don't get the right kind of sleep, these processes are interrupted. The body doesn't get the chance to fully heal, and the brain doesn't get the time it needs to reset. The lack of proper sleep also makes the stress response worse. When you're sleep deprived, your body's stress threshold lowers, meaning that the next little stressor that comes along will feel even more intense. You're more likely to feel overwhelmed by challenges, and your ability to cope with stress diminishes. Cortisol levels remain high, and the stress cycle continues, becoming harder to break. Additionally, when you're chronically sleep deprived, your ability to think clearly and make decisions becomes impaired. The prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for higher level thinking and decision making, requires sufficient rest to function properly. Without proper sleep, this area of the brain struggles to maintain its cognitive abilities, leading to poorer judgment, impulsivity, and emotional reactivity. When you're tired, it's harder to regulate your emotions, and you may find yourself reacting more strongly to situations that wouldn't normally bother you, and this doesn't just impact your mood, it impacts your memory. Sleep is essential for consolidating memories, moving information from short-term storage to long-term storage. When you don't sleep well, your ability to retain new information, solve problems, and recall past experiences is compromised. This means that when stress is high and sleep is low, your brain isn't operating at its best. The lack of sleep also impairs the hippocampus, the brain's memory center, just as chronic stress does, creating a perfect storm for cognitive and emotional difficulties. The emotional impact of sleep deprivation is also profound. Lack of sleep has been linked to increased levels of anxiety and depression. When you don't get enough rest, the brain's emotional regulation system becomes less efficient. The amygdala, the brain's emotional center, becomes more reactive, and it's harder to manage negative emotions. The emotional loudness that cortisol creates is amplified in the absence of sleep, creating a cycle of emotional dysregulation that becomes harder to control. You may find yourself feeling on edge, anxious, or even sad, and it's often because your brain simply hasn't had the chance to process emotions in a healthy way. The physical consequences of chronic sleep deprivation, coupled with high cortisol levels, are equally alarming. Over time, insufficient sleep can lead to weight gain, increased inflammation in the body, and a weakened immune system. Your body's ability to repair itself is diminished, leaving you more vulnerable to illness and disease. High cortisol, combined with poor sleep, has been linked to an increased risk of heart disease, diabetes, and other chronic conditions. The longer you remain in this cycle of high stress and poor sleep, the more your body is at risk. The good news is that the effects of poor sleep can be reversed. When you begin to manage stress and allow your body to rest properly, the sleep cycle can be restored and the body can begin to heal. It's important to prioritize sleep, making it a non-negotiable part of your daily routine. Creating a calming bedtime routine, reducing exposure to blue light before sleep, and practicing relaxation techniques can help lower cortisol levels at night, allowing your body to fall into a natural rhythm. Exercise, while it's an excellent tool for reducing stress, should also be timed properly. Too much physical activity late in the evening can increase cortisol levels, while exercise earlier in the day can help regulate cortisol and improve sleep. The key is consistency. When you make sleep a priority and start to manage stress effectively, the body begins to reset itself. Cortisol levels drop and the body enters a state of calm. Sleep becomes not just an opportunity for rest, but a vital part of your body's overall healing process. Over time, as sleep improves, so does the body's ability to manage stress, think clearly, and regulate emotions. It's important to remember that sleep is not a luxury. It's a biological necessity. Your body and brain need sleep to function at their best. When cortisol is high, sleep can become elusive, but with the right tools and understanding, it's possible to restore balance. The slow cycle of stress and sleeplessness can be broken, and in its place, you can create a life that is more balanced, more energized, and more resilient in the face of stress. Stress doesn't just affect our bodies or our brains. It affects the way we feel. It seeps into our emotional lives, shaping how we respond to the world and how we interact with others. The effects of chronic stress are like an echo, reverberating through the mood and emotions, influencing how we perceive the present and how we recall the past. These emotional echoes of stress don't just pass quickly, they linger, creating a lasting imprint that can be hard to shake off. The relationship between stress and mood is complex, layered, and deeply connected. When stress activates the body's stress response, it releases cortisol, a hormone that helps the body respond to challenges. But cortisol doesn't just impact physical functions, it also impacts the emotional centers of the brain. When cortisol is released, it triggers a cascade of effects, particularly in the amygdala, the brain's emotional control center. The amygdala is the brain's watchdog, constantly on the lookout for potential threats. When the brain perceives stress, it activates the amygdala, which in turn sends signals throughout the body, preparing us for action. But in a stressful world where the danger isn't always physical, the amygdala often overreacts, and the result is an emotional response that's out of proportion to the actual situation. This is where the emotional echoes of stress begin to form. Chronic stress doesn't just leave a temporary feeling of anxiety or tension, it leaves behind a lasting imprint on your mood. If you're constantly in a state of stress, your brain begins to associate nearly everything with the potential for danger. The brain's response to everyday challenges, like a work deadline or a disagreement with a friend, becomes a heightened emotional reaction. Your amygdala, ever on alert, triggers feelings of fear, anxiety, and frustration, even when the situation may not warrant such a strong response. Over time, these emotional reactions become automatic, and stress begins to shape your mood in ways that feel uncontrollable. The amygdala doesn't work in isolation. It is deeply connected to other parts of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex, which regulates emotional responses and helps us think through situations logically. When stress hijacks the brain, it impairs the prefrontal cortex, making it harder to regulate emotions effectively. The result is a pattern of reactivity, one where emotions take over without the rational thought to temper them. When you're under chronic stress, you may find that you're quicker to anger, more prone to sadness, or simply more irritable than you were before. It's as if the emotional part of your brain is running the show, with the rational part left in the background, unable to manage the situation. This heightened emotional reactivity can lead to a cycle that's difficult to break. The more you experience stress, the more your emotional responses become amplified. Stress sets off emotional reactions which can lead to more stress, creating a loop that becomes self-perpetuating. A single moment of frustration can snowball into a day of irritability, which can in turn affect relationships, work, and overall well-being. It's not just the stress itself, it's the way stress distorts your emotional reality, amplifying everything from minor annoyances to major challenges. The emotional echoes of stress also extend how we perceive the world around us. When you're stressed, your emotional filter becomes clouded, and this affects how you interpret your environment. For example, something as simple as a late email or a friend's neutral comment might be perceived as a personal attack or a source of anxiety. This misperception happens because your brain, under the influence of stress, is constantly scanning for threats. It's not just about what's happening in the moment, it's about how your brain has been conditioned by chronic stress to respond to the world. As a result, even everyday experiences can feel overwhelming or emotionally charged. Stress also affects our ability to experience positive emotions. In a chronically stressed state, the emotional center of the brain is so focused on the negative, on perceived threats and dangers, that it becomes harder to access feelings of joy, contentment, or relaxation. People who are under constant stress often report feeling numb or empty, as though they can't fully engage in the moments that once brought them happiness. This is because the brain, under chronic stress, becomes less capable of producing the chemicals associated with positive emotions like dopamine and serotonin. Over time, this emotional flatness becomes a major source of dissatisfaction and emotional fatigue. Another aspect of emotional echoes is the way stress alters our memory of past events. Under stress, the brain tends to store memories in a more emotionally charged way, amplifying negative experiences. This is part of the brain's survival mechanism. The amygdala is particularly active when stress is involved, making it easier to remember traumatic or emotionally intense experiences. But when the brain is constantly under stress, it becomes more difficult to recall positive memories with the same clarity. Instead, negative experiences and emotions dominate our recollection, shaping how we view our past. This can create a distorted view of life, where stress clouds our memories, making everything seem more difficult or negative than it actually was. These emotional echoes of stress not only affect the way we feel in the present, but also impact our future. Stress can cause us to worry excessively about what's ahead, anticipating more of the same difficulties and challenges. When you're stressed, your brain is often stuck in a state of what-if thinking, imagining worst-case scenarios and preparing for outcomes that haven't even happened yet. This constant worry feeds into the cycle of stress, making it harder to break free from the emotional echoes that keep reverberating through your life. But there's a way out. Just as stress shapes our emotional experiences, we can retrain the brain to respond to stress differently. The key lies in reducing the physiological effects of stress and restoring balance to the brain's emotional systems. Techniques like mindfulness meditation, deep breathing, and body relaxation help lower cortisol levels, allowing the brain's emotional control centers to return to a balanced state. These practices give the prefrontal cortex the space it needs to regulate emotional responses, breaking the automatic cycle of reactivity that stress creates. Physical exercise is another powerful tool in this process. Exercise helps to release endorphins, the brain's natural mood elevators, while also reducing cortisol levels. Even moderate physical activity such as walking or yoga can help restore emotional balance and reduce the effects of chronic stress. Sleep, too, is crucial in managing the emotional effects of stress. When the body is well rested, the brain is better able to process emotions, store positive memories, and regulate responses to stress. A good night's sleep helps reset the emotional systems of the brain, giving you the clarity and calm you need to break free from the emotional echoes that stress creates. In addition to these strategies, it's important to acknowledge that managing stress is a long-term process. It's not about eliminating stress entirely. That's simply not realistic. Life will always present challenges, and stress is a natural part of being human. But by learning how to respond to stress in healthier ways, we can reduce its emotional impact and regain control over how we feel. With time, patience, and the right tools, we can quiet the echoes of stress, allowing our emotional landscape to return to a place of balance and well-being. Stress doesn't only live in your thoughts. It doesn't stay confined to the late-night worries, the what-ifs, or the endless mental rehearsals of things that haven't even happened yet. Stress settles into the body. It leaves traces in your muscles, in the rhythm of your heart, in the way you breathe without realizing you've been holding your breath for far too long. Even when your mind moves on or tells itself it's fine, your body remembers what the mind can't always articulate. This is one of the strangest, most overlooked effects of cortisol. It isn't just a chemical messenger for the brain. It's a signal that travels through every system in the body. Each time stress surges, cortisol sends out instructions. Tighten here, prepare there, hold energy for the next challenge. And if this happens again and again, your body learns it. It adapts to it. Muscles stay tense even when there's no immediate reason. Your shoulders rise and stay there. A quiet armor you didn't mean to wear. Your jaw clenches. Your stomach feels unsettled. You don't think about it most of the time, but your body does. When stress becomes chronic, the body stops differentiating between real emergencies and the constant low hum of modern life. It reacts to both in nearly the same way. This is why you might wake up with a sore neck even if you didn't notice yourself tensing it. Or why, after weeks of pressure, your back aches even though you never injured it. It's the physical memory of cortisol at work. Science has a term for this: somatic memory. It's not the same as the kind of memory that lets you recall where you left your keys or what you ate for breakfast. Somatic memory is the body's way of holding on to experience. When you've been stressed for too long, cortisol teaches your nervous system to stay on guard, and the body stores that lesson as if it's a habit. The nervous system starts to treat tension as its default state, and over time, that becomes what normal feels like. This is why chronic stress so often shows up physically. Elevated cortisol levels have been linked to headaches, muscle pain, digestive issues, and even a weakened immune response. Your body remembers stress because cortisol never gave it the signal that the danger had passed. Your heart rate stays a little faster, your breath shallower, your muscles tighter, and because these changes happen slowly, you stop noticing. It just becomes the background hum of living under pressure. The connection between stress and the body doesn't stop at muscles or heart rate. Cortisol has a direct effect on the immune system as well. In short bursts, cortisol can reduce inflammation. It's one of the ways it helps us survive acute stress. But when cortisol is present all the time, the immune system starts to falter. It either becomes suppressed, making you more vulnerable to illness, or it overreacts, triggering excessive inflammation that can lead to long-term health problems. In both cases, the message is the same. The body is still holding on to the signal that something is wrong, even when the actual threat is long gone. And then there's the gut. Cortisol doesn't ignore it. In fact, it's deeply involved. The gut is lined with a dense network of neurons often called the second brain, and it communicates constantly with your central nervous system. When cortisol rises, digestion slows. The body diverts energy away from the gut because, in a crisis, eating isn't the priority. Survival is. Over time, this can lead to digestive issues, discomfort, and a deep-seated sense that something in your body is perpetually uneasy. It's not all in your head. It's in the way your body learned to exist in stress mode. This is where mind and body become inseparable. The body's memory of stress keeps feeding the brain signals that reinforce the sense of unease. Your tense shoulders tell your brain something is wrong. Your shallow breath tells it to stay alert. Your racing heart confirms it. It becomes a loop, one that doesn't stop just because the original stressor has ended. This is why sometimes, even on calm days, you might feel restless, as if you're waiting for something bad to happen without knowing why. Your body is still living in the echo of stress, and cortisol is still conducting the rhythm. The hopeful part of this is that, just as the body can remember stress, it can also be taught how to remember calm. Physical practices can help reverse the patterns that cortisol has carved into the body. Slow, deliberate breathing can signal to your nervous system that it's safe to relax. Gentle stretching or yoga can release the tension that's been stored in your muscles for weeks or months. Even something as simple as a walk outside can start to untangle the knots of stress the body has been holding on to. These aren't just habits. They're a way of retraining your body to respond differently, of teaching it that it no longer needs to hold itself in a constant state of defense. Sleep plays a crucial role here too. When you sleep deeply, cortisol levels drop to their lowest point. It's one of the few times the body can truly reset, free from the constant push of stress hormones. This is why chronic stress and poor sleep often go hand in hand. When cortisol is too high, it prevents the body from entering deep rest, and when you can't rest, the body never fully lets go of the stress it's holding. Breaking this cycle isn't easy, but it starts with giving the body space to remember what calm feels like. The truth is, your body remembers everything, even what your mind tries to forget. Every tense moment, every prolonged worry, every late night spent wide awake thinking. But it also remembers recovery. It remembers what it feels like to breathe deeply, to relax, to release. The same pathways that once taught it to hold stress can be rewired to teach it calm. That's the hidden strength of the body. It can learn and it can unlearn. And as you start to work with your body instead of against it, something shifts. The constant hum of cortisol begins to quiet. Muscles soften, breathing slows. The body finally sends a new message to the brain. It's over, you're safe, you can rest now. Habits feel automatic. You brush your teeth without thinking about it, check your phone before you even realize you've picked it up, or find yourself craving the same late-night snack at the exact same time every evening. They seem simple on the surface, but beneath them lies a complex network of brain circuits that are shaped and reinforced by experience. And in this network, cortisol, the hormone of stress, plays a far greater role than most people realize. Stress doesn't just change how you feel in the moment. It shapes what you do repeatedly until those actions carve deep grooves in the brain. Each time cortisol surges, it strengthens certain connections in your neural wiring, making you more likely to repeat the same behaviors. Over time, these stress-driven behaviors become habits, automatic loops that play out almost without conscious thought. Consider what happens during a stressful day. Maybe you feel overwhelmed at work, your heart races and cortisol floods your system. In that moment, you reach for something familiar, scrolling endlessly on your phone, eating comfort food, or retreating into avoidance. These actions provide temporary relief, and because they slightly reduce your immediate discomfort, the brain logs them as useful. It doesn't matter if they actually solve the problem. Your brain just remembers that for a brief moment, you felt a little safer. Cortisol creates a powerful association between stress and that behavior, and each time it happens, the wiring gets stronger. This is why breaking bad habits under stress feels nearly impossible. When cortisol is high, the brain's prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for self-control and decision-making, goes quiet, while the brain's habit-forming centers, especially the basal ganglia, take over. These circuits thrive on repetition, not logic. If you've ever felt yourself falling back into old routines when you're stressed, even ones you thought you'd left behind, this is why. Cortisol doesn't just make you feel anxious, it pushes your brain toward the path of least resistance, the well-worn tracks of behavior you've repeated before. This wiring also works in more subtle ways. Even if you're not actively aware of it, stress can shape the habits of how you think. Repetitive worry, for example, is a habit. The more often cortisol drives your brain into overthinking, the easier it becomes to get stuck in that loop. Each time you cycle through the same anxious thought, the neural pathway strengthens until worry becomes the default setting of your mind. Your brain learns to anticipate stress before it even arrives, because it's been conditioned to do so. And yet, cortisol isn't only a force that reinforces bad habits, it can also play a role in building better ones. Just as cortisol helps encode the memory of stressful behaviors, it can also help lock in the positive ones, especially if those behaviors help reduce stress itself. For example, if you've ever gone for a walk after a difficult day and felt calmer afterward, your brain registers that connection. If you repeat it enough, that walk becomes a habit, a go-to ritual whenever stress shows up. Over time, the brain begins to favour that response over the unhealthy ones, simply because it's been rehearsed enough to become automatic. The challenge, of course, is that stress rarely gives you the space to make deliberate choices. When cortisol is high, it narrows your focus, keeps you in survival mode, and pushes you toward what's familiar. This is why so many people stay trapped in habits that they know don't serve them. They're not lazy or undisciplined. Their brains are simply following the wiring that cortisol has been strengthening for years. But this wiring isn't fixed. One of the most remarkable things about the brain is its neuroplasticity, its ability to form new connections and rewire old ones. Cortisol may create strong patterns, but they can be overwritten with new ones. The key is repetition, patience, and learning how to interrupt the automatic loops that stress creates. One of the most effective ways to do this is to build small, simple routines that signal safety to your brain. When you create predictable, calming habits, like practicing deep breathing, meditating for a few minutes, or even making a ritual out of a quiet cup of tea, You're teaching your nervous system a different response to stress. Each time you practice that behavior in a stressful moment, you lay down new wiring. You're still under stress, but instead of reinforcing old patterns, you're creating new ones. This is also why consistency matters so much more than intensity. You don't need to completely overhaul your life in one grand gesture. A single repeated action, done daily, has more power to reshape your stress-driven habits than any single breakthrough moment. Cortisol doesn't respond to theories or intentions, it responds to patterns. The more you repeat a healthy pattern under stress, the more the brain starts to default to it. Another important part of reshaping these habits is awareness. Stress thrives in the background. It works best when you're too busy to notice what it's doing. But when you become aware of the moment cortisol is steering your behavior, when you catch yourself reaching for that familiar, unhelpful escape, you create a pause. That pause is where the wiring can change. By simply recognizing what's happening, you shift from running on autopilot to taking the wheel, even if only for a moment. This is also where the connection between mind and body becomes crucial. Because cortisol doesn't just wire habits into your brain, it wires them into your body, your posture, your breathing, even the way you hold tension in your muscles. All of it becomes part of the stress response habit. Learning to relax the body, to slow your breath and release tension, can act as a signal to the brain that the loop is being interrupted. Over time, this physical reset starts to weaken the grip of old habits and strengthen new ones that are rooted in calm rather than fear. It's important to understand that these changes don't happen overnight. The invisible wiring of habits has often been years in the making, and rewiring it takes time. But every time you choose a different response in the middle of stress, every time you break the cycle, even once, you're reshaping the network that cortisol built. You're showing your brain that there's another way to respond. And little by little, those moments add up until the old wiring begins to fade and the new wiring takes over. Stress may leave its fingerprints on the habits we form, but it doesn't have to define them forever. You can teach your brain new associations, new pathways, new ways of handling the pressure of life. Cortisol may be powerful, but it isn't permanent. With enough patience and practice, the invisible wiring of stress can become the wiring of resilience, calm, and strength. Worry is supposed to be temporary. It's meant to alert you, to make you pay attention, to push you to solve a problem. But for many of us, it doesn't stop there. Instead of coming and going, worry settles in and circles endlessly, looping through the same thoughts, the same scenarios over and over again. You think about what could go wrong, what already went wrong, and what might go wrong tomorrow. And the longer the loop spins, the harder it is to break out of it. At the center of this endless cycle is cortisol. When cortisol rises, your brain becomes hyper-focused on threats, real or imagined. It narrows your attention, sharpening it on whatever feels most urgent. In an actual emergency, this is helpful. You want your mind locked on the immediate danger, not drifting away to something irrelevant. But in the modern world, where most of our threats are psychological, this focus doesn't resolve the problem. It simply traps you inside it. When you worry, your brain's emotional centers, particularly the amygdala, light up, sending out stress signals that keep cortisol flowing. That cortisol, in turn, reinforces the very circuits of the brain that fuel worry, especially the habit-driven networks we've already seen at work. This is why a single stressful thought can repeat itself again and again, even when you know you've already thought it through. Your brain isn't doing this to annoy you. It's doing it because cortisol has taught it that staying alert is safer than letting go. And letting go is exactly what the brain doesn't trust when you're under stress. To your nervous system, relaxing feels like a risk. So instead of winding down, it keeps scanning for danger, replaying every what if it can find. This is where the loop begins. Stress feeds worry. Worry keeps cortisol high, and cortisol locks your brain into the same thought patterns that created the stress in the first place. If you've ever lain awake at night, staring at the ceiling while your mind replays a conversation or reimagines worst-case scenarios, you've felt this loop in action. Your logical mind, the part that knows you need sleep, takes a back seat while cortisol keeps your emotional brain on high alert. It's not just a mental habit, it's a biochemical state. Your body is primed for action even though there's nothing to run from, nothing to fight, nothing to fix right now. Over time, this loop begins to reshape the brain. The more you worry, the easier it becomes to worry again. Neural pathways strengthen with repetition, and worry becomes the default mode of thinking. This is why chronic stress can feel like it rewires your personality. It doesn't just make you anxious for a day, it can make worry feel automatic, as if your brain no longer knows how to switch gears. The effects of this are everywhere. Your memory becomes coloured by stress, recalling negative details more vividly than positive ones. Your decision-making becomes clouded, because cortisol is busy dialing down the rational prefrontal cortex while turning up the emotional amygdala. Even your sense of time can shift. When you're stuck in a worry loop, every problem feels immediate. Everything feels urgent. There's no room for perspective, no space for calm. And yet, as relentless as this loop feels, it can be broken. Because worry, for all its power, is still a learned behaviour, one the brain only maintains because cortisol keeps reinforcing it. If you can change the conditions, if you can lower cortisol and disrupt the feedback cycle, the brain can learn a new way of responding. The first step is interruption. Worry thrives in an uninterrupted state. It loops best when you let it run unchecked. Techniques like mindfulness and grounding exercises work because they break the loop. When you bring your attention back to the present moment, by focusing on your breath, the feeling of your feet on the floor, or even a simple sound in the room, you're forcing your brain out of the endless what-if track. You're introducing a pause, and in that pause, cortisol begins to ease. But breaking the loop isn't only about the mind, it's about the body too. Physical states reinforce mental ones. When cortisol is high, your heart rate climbs, your muscles tense, and your breath shortens. These signals all tell your brain that it's right to keep worrying. Slowing your breath, relaxing your shoulders, and unclenching your jaw may seem small, but they send a powerful counter-message: you're not in danger. Over time, the body can teach the brain to quiet the loop. Sleep also matters here. Without adequate rest, cortisol levels remain elevated, and the worry loop gets stronger. This is why nighttime worry often feels worse than daytime worry. When you're exhausted, your brain loses access to the prefrontal cortex's logical braking system, and the emotional circuits run unchecked. Rest doesn't just make you feel better, it restores the brain's ability to regulate itself, giving you the leverage you need to break the cycle. And then there's repetition, the same principle that built the loop in the first place. Just as worrying over and over wires that pattern into your brain, practicing calm, through breathing, grounding, or other techniques, can wire in a new pattern. Each time you break the loop, even for a few seconds, you weaken its grip. Those seconds become minutes, the minutes turn into hours, and slowly your brain learns something new, that you can step out of the loop and survive. The most important thing to understand is that worry isn't who you are. It's not a personality trait, it's a pattern, and patterns can change. Cortisol may push your brain toward loops of fear and stress, but it can just as easily reinforce loops of calm and control if you train it to. Worry may feel endless now, but it isn't. Even the strongest loops eventually fade when you stop feeding them, and when that happens, you don't just stop worrying, you reclaim the space in your mind for something else. Clarity, focus, and peace that doesn't need to be chased because it's already there. Stress is exhausting, overwhelming, and relentless. Yet strangely, some kinds of stress can feel almost familiar. Predictable stress, the kind that arrives at the same time every day or follows the same pattern, can become oddly comforting, even when it isn't good for you. It might be the tension of rushing to meet a deadline, the familiar anxiety before a big meeting, or the steady pressure of juggling responsibilities that never quite end. It's not pleasant, but it's known. And in the strange way the brain works, known can sometimes feel safer than calm. Cortisol has a lot to do with this. When stress becomes predictable, cortisol doesn't just spike and fade, it starts to align itself with the pattern. The brain learns the rhythm of it, almost as if it's preparing ahead of time. That morning surge of cortisol you feel before a busy day, or the restless energy that kicks in just before a recurring obligation, isn't random. It's your brain anticipating stress the same way it anticipates waking up in the morning or feeling hungry at certain times of day. This is one of the reasons why stress can feel so hard to escape. Over time, the brain adapts not just to high cortisol levels but to the timing of them. The hypothalamus and adrenal glands, which govern the stress response, start responding as if stress is part of the schedule. It becomes less about reacting to individual events and more about following a script your body has rehearsed hundreds of times before. And in that predictability, the brain finds a strange kind of comfort. Not comfort in the sense of pleasure or relief, but comfort in familiarity. When you've lived with a certain pattern of stress for long enough, it starts to feel normal. Your nervous system learns to exist in a state of constant readiness, as if calm were the unusual state and tension the baseline. This is why, for some people, even moments of peace can feel unsettling. The absence of stress doesn't register as safety. It feels like something's missing. Cortisol's role in this is subtle, but powerful. The hormone doesn't only prepare the body for danger, it also reinforces whatever state it's repeatedly exposed to. If that state happens to be chronic stress, cortisol keeps the body in line with it. Muscles remain slightly tense, the heart beats a little faster, and the mind stays primed for the next demand. Over time, this stress posture becomes the default, and predictability makes it even harder to break free. Think about routines that are stressful but familiar. The morning rush to get out the door, the daily pile of emails, the constant pressure of tasks that never seem to end. Each of these moments triggers a small, reliable burst of cortisol. They're unpleasant, but they're expected. And the brain, in its relentless pursuit of efficiency, learns to function inside that tension. It stops questioning whether this level of stress is healthy. It just adapts to it, wiring your thoughts, behaviors, and even your emotions around a cycle that feels inevitable. But there's a cost. Predictable stress might feel manageable because you know it's coming, but the body doesn't actually stop paying the price. Cortisol, even when it's expected, still affects the brain, the immune system, and the heart in the same way. The familiarity of the pattern doesn't make it less damaging. It only makes it harder to recognize how deeply it's affecting you. The real danger of predictable stress is that it hides in plain sight. Because it feels routine, you stop noticing it. You tell yourself it's just how life is, and your body adjusts accordingly. But inside, cortisol continues to reshape your brain, reinforcing circuits of vigilance, habit, and tension. It's a slow transformation, and because it happens gradually, you might not realize how much of yourself you've handed over to that steady, familiar pressure. Yet there's another side to this story, because the same mechanism that locks you into predictable stress can also help you escape it. If the brain can adapt to stress that repeats at the same time and in the same way, it can also adapt to predictable calm. The key is replacing the old patterns with new ones, rituals that teach the nervous system to expect relief instead of tension. Something as simple as setting aside a few minutes each day for deep breathing, stretching, or quiet reflection can start to rewrite that script. At first, the brain resists. It still expects the rush of cortisol, the familiar edge of stress. But over time, repetition teaches it something different, that there's a new pattern to anticipate. Calm can be scheduled, stillness can be learned, and with each repetition, cortisol begins to recede, replaced by rhythms that support rest rather than tension. This is why routines are powerful, for better or worse. If stress can be practiced, so can calm. When you create habits that lower cortisol, consistent sleep, mindful breaks, even short moments of silence, you give your brain a new kind of predictability, one that doesn't drain you but restores you. And slowly, the strange comfort of predictable stress is replaced by the genuine comfort of predictable peace. It's not an overnight transformation. The brain doesn't forget years of stress patterns in a week. But every small shift rewires the circuits that cortisol has been shaping. You teach your nervous system that it no longer has to live in that constant state of readiness. That safety can become familiar too, and eventually it does. Burnout doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in gradually, hidden inside long days, short nights, and the constant weight of unfinished tasks. At first, it looks like ordinary stress. You tell yourself you just need a weekend off or a good night's sleep, but then the fog thickens, motivation fades. The things that once felt manageable begin to feel impossible. You wake up tired, and you go to bed even more tired. And somewhere in that quiet exhaustion, you wonder if your brain will ever feel like itself again. Burnout is the brain's way of saying, enough. It's not just emotional fatigue, it's physical, cognitive, and deeply chemical. Cortisol plays a central role here. When stress is unrelenting, cortisol remains high for too long, and the systems that normally help the brain recover stop working the way they should. The hippocampus, which helps regulate the stress response, begins to weaken. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for focus and decision-making, goes quiet. The amygdala, the emotional alarm center, grows louder, dominating your thoughts with anxiety or frustration. Burnout isn't just a feeling. It's the result of the brain being rewired by prolonged stress. And yet, the most remarkable thing about the brain is this: it can heal. Even in burnout, even when you feel depleted and detached, your brain hasn't lost its ability to recover. The same neuroplasticity that allows stress to reshape your mind also allows recovery to rebuild it. Burnout is not a permanent state. It's a signal, and when you answer it, healing begins. The first step in that healing is understanding why your brain feels the way it does. In burnout, cortisol stops acting like a sharp spike and instead becomes a constant presence, a slow drip that keeps the nervous system locked in stress mode. This drains your energy and impairs the circuits responsible for focus and motivation. Your brain starts conserving resources the way a city might shut off power to certain neighborhoods during a shortage. This is why, in burnout, simple tasks feel monumental and pleasure feels distant. It isn't a lack of willpower, it's biology. Healing from burnout means giving the brain what stress has been taking from it: rest, recovery, and safety. One of the most powerful ways this happens is through lowering cortisol. The brain can't rewire itself if it's stuck in survival mode. When cortisol begins to fall, the hippocampus can repair itself, the prefrontal cortex regains strength, and the amygdala quiets down. This doesn't happen instantly, but it happens faster than most people think. The brain is constantly rebuilding itself, and when you remove the constant flood of stress signals, it begins to shift direction. Sleep is one of the most important tools in this process. During deep sleep, cortisol levels drop to their lowest point. The brain uses this time not just to rest, but to repair. Synapses are pruned and reorganized, memories are consolidated, and stress circuits get a chance to cool down. This is why sleep is often the first thing that feels broken in burnout, and also the first thing that must be repaired if healing is going to happen. Restoring consistent deep sleep is like opening a repair shop in the brain. Another key part of recovery is rhythm. The brain thrives on patterns. Burnout often disrupts these rhythms. You stay up late, eat irregularly, skip breaks, and run on adrenaline. Reintroducing steady, predictable routines, regular meals, consistent sleep times, deliberate pauses during the day gives the brain a sense of stability. Cortisol starts to align with those rhythms too, rising when it should in the morning, falling at night, instead of hovering at a steady, draining high. Then there's the role of small restorative habits. When you're burned out, big changes feel impossible, but the brain doesn't need dramatic gestures. It needs repetition, a few minutes of deep breathing, a short walk, time outside in natural light. These things may seem insignificant, but they send powerful signals to your nervous system. You're safe, you're allowed to rest, you're not in danger. Each small signal lowers cortisol just a little, and over time, those tiny reductions create room for the brain to heal. And with healing comes something else, the return of pleasure. Chronic stress dulls the brain's reward system. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter linked to motivation and enjoyment, doesn't flow as freely under constant cortisol. But as stress levels drop, the brain slowly remembers how to respond to small joys. A favourite song, a good meal, a quiet moment without demands. These aren't luxuries, they're part of the rewiring process. Every positive experience you allow yourself in recovery strengthens the neural pathways that pull you out of burnout. Of course, healing the brain from burnout isn't only about rest. It's also about changing the relationship with stress itself. Burnout happens when the stress response never shuts off. Teaching the brain to turn it down takes practice. This is where mindfulness, meditation, and even simple breathing exercises matter so much. They train the nervous system to shift out of high alert. Each time you consciously slow your breath or focus on the present moment, you're showing your brain that it doesn't have to live in survival mode, and every repetition strengthens that ability until it becomes easier and easier to do. One of the most hopeful truths about the brain is that recovery isn't linear, but it is cumulative. Every moment of calm counts, every night of good sleep, every small walk, every pause where you let yourself breathe, it all adds up. Even if progress feels slow, your brain is constantly reshaping itself in response to these new signals. Burnout may feel permanent when you're in it, but it isn't. The brain is built to recover, to repair the damage stress has done, and to relearn how to function in a state of balance. It doesn't happen in a single leap. It happens in quiet, steady steps that build on each other, until one day you notice the fog has lifted. The exhaustion has eased. Your mind feels clearer. And in that moment you realize something profound. The brain that was once reshaped by stress can be reshaped by healing too. Your brain is not fixed. It may feel that way when stress has carved deep grooves into your thoughts and habits, when cortisol has left its fingerprints on your memory, your focus, and your mood. But beneath all of that, your brain is still capable of change. This ability has a name: neuroplasticity. It's the brain's way of rewriting its own map, of tearing down old connections and building new ones, of reshaping itself to meet the world as it is now, not just how it used to be. Neuroplasticity is what allows a child to learn to walk, a musician to master an instrument, and someone recovering from a stroke to regain lost abilities. But it's also what allows you to undo the effects of chronic stress. Cortisol may train your brain to be hypervigilant, to worry, to hold on to tension like it's armor, but those patterns are not permanent. They are simply well-worn paths, and neuroplasticity gives you the tools to build new ones. Imagine your brain like a landscape. Every thought you repeat, every habit you reinforce, every emotional reaction you fall into is like walking the same trail through that landscape. Over time, that trail becomes packed down, easy to follow, almost automatic. Stress does this with frightening efficiency. Cortisol makes sure those paths, worry, fear, avoidance, are walked often enough to feel natural. But here's the thing about paths. They're not carved in stone. They're just dirt, and dirt can grow over. New trails can be made. This is where neuroplasticity becomes powerful. Every time you interrupt a stress-driven pattern, you take a step off the old trail. It might be clumsy at first. The new path is rough, overgrown, unfamiliar. But each time you walk it, it gets clearer. Your brain lays down new wiring, new connections between neurons, and slowly, that once awkward trail becomes the one your mind prefers. This is how habits change. This is how the brain recovers from stress. Cortisol, of course, resists this process at first. When you've been living in survival mode for a long time, the brain treats stress like home. But neuroplasticity doesn't need permission from cortisol, it only needs repetition. You teach the brain with what you do over and over. A single moment of calm might not change much, but dozens of moments, hundreds. They begin to rewire the system. Even small practices can trigger this shift. Breathing deeply for a few minutes lowers cortisol just enough for the brain to experience what safety feels like. That feeling, subtle as it is, becomes a reference point. The next time you practice, your brain remembers it, and the path becomes a little easier to walk. The same is true of mindfulness, movement, and sleep. Each one creates conditions where stress circuits quiet down and new, healthier circuits get the chance to form. Neuroplasticity is also why recovery doesn't happen all at once. Think of it like replacing an old map with a new one. You don't erase the old routes overnight, you redraw them piece by piece. Some of the old trails still show up at first. Worry may come back, tension may return. But as you keep reinforcing the new pathways, those old trails fade. The map changes, until one day the new routes aren't just options, they're defaults. This is also why setbacks don't erase progress. If you've been practicing calm and then have a stressful week, it doesn't undo the new wiring you've been building. The brain holds on to every repetition, every moment you've walked that new path. Even if stress drags you back temporarily, the new map is still there, waiting to be used again. The most fascinating part of neuroplasticity is that it doesn't care how old you are or how long you've been stuck in stress. Your brain can rewire itself at any age. Studies have shown that even in later life, the brain forms new neurons and new connections when given the right conditions. The same stress circuits that once dominated can be reshaped by calm, by practice, and by persistence. This is why recovery from long-term stress and burnout is not only possible, it's expected if you give your brain the right environment. Sleep, exercise, nutrition, and mindful practices are not simply wellness tips. They are literal tools for rewiring your brain. Every time you slow down your breath, every time you choose to rest instead of push, every time you give yourself a moment of quiet instead of rushing into another demand, you're laying down a new neural path. And with every repetition, it grows stronger. In time, the brain that was once mapped by stress begins to look different. The amygdala quiets, the hippocampus strengthens, repairing your ability to remember and learn. The prefrontal cortex regains its sharpness, helping you make thoughtful choices again. None of this is abstract. It's physical. It's measurable. It's the brain rewriting itself in response to the signals you give it. And perhaps the most powerful thing about this process is that you don't have to see it happening for it to be real. Neuroplasticity works in the background, quietly redrawing the map with every small step you take toward calm. One day, you simply notice you're not reacting the way you used to. You're not living in the same state of tension. You've built a different brain, one that knows how to find its way out of stress. For all the complexity of stress and cortisol, some of the most powerful ways to bring them back into balance are surprisingly simple. They don't come in the form of pills or elaborate interventions. They are things your body has always known how to use: breath, light, and quiet. These are not luxuries or afterthoughts. They are built-in mechanisms for resetting the stress response, and when used consistently, they can help the brain and body remember what calm feels like. Start with the breath. Breathing is something you do automatically, without thought, but it is also one of the few bodily functions you can consciously control, and this is where its power lies. When stress is high, your breathing changes, becoming shallow and quick, matching the pace of your racing mind. This is cortisol at work, preparing you for action, convincing your body that it doesn't have time to rest. But the brain listens to the breath, just as much as the breath listens to the brain. When you slow it down, when you draw in deep, steady inhales and longer, softer exhales, you send a very different message to your nervous system. The danger has passed. This is why slow, deliberate breathing can lower cortisol. Each long exhale activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's natural rest and digest mode, which directly counteracts the stress response. You don't need elaborate techniques to start. Just 5 minutes of steady, controlled breathing can begin to pull you out of the cortisol-driven loop of tension. Over time, as you practice this regularly, you train your body to respond more quickly to these signals. Calm becomes something you can call up almost on command, not by force, but by reminding the brain what safety feels like. Then there's light. The relationship between light and cortisol is deep and biological. Your circadian rhythm, the internal clock that tells your body when to wake and when to rest, is anchored to the natural cycle of light and darkness. When morning light hits your eyes, it signals the brain to raise cortisol levels just enough to wake you up, helping you feel alert and ready for the day. This rise is healthy, a natural part of your rhythm. But modern life has blurred these lines. Artificial lighting, late-night screens and irregular schedules confuse your internal clock, keeping cortisol from finding its proper rhythm. Exposure to natural light, especially early in the day, helps reset this cycle. When you step outside and let sunlight reach your eyes, it sends a powerful signal to your brain. This is morning. This is safe. This is the right time for energy. Later, as evening falls and light fades, cortisol naturally begins to drop, preparing your body for rest. Without this cycle, cortisol lingers and sleep suffers. But by aligning yourself with the natural rise and fall of daylight, even just by taking a short walk outside in the morning, you help reteach your brain and body the rhythm they were designed for. And then there is quiet. In a world of constant noise, alerts, conversations, background music, the steady hum of everything that demands your attention, silence has become rare. But quiet is not just pleasant, it is necessary. Every sound you hear, every fragment of input, asks your brain to process it. When you live in constant stimulation, cortisol finds reasons to stay elevated, because the brain never fully stops scanning. Quiet is what breaks that pattern. When you allow yourself even a few minutes of stillness, no screens, no talking, no demands, you create a space where the nervous system can settle. In that space, the brain begins to downshift. Cortisol starts to fall, heart rate slows, and the mind feels less like it's racing from one demand to the next. Over time, this practice of deliberate quiet strengthens your ability to recover from stress. It's not just an emotional reset, it's a physical one, a way of teaching your body how to step out of alert mode and back into rest. The combined effect of breath, light and quiet is more powerful than most people realize. Together, they create a foundation for balance that no complex strategy can replace. Deep breathing lowers cortisol in the moment. Light restores its natural rhythm. Quiet gives the brain the pause it needs to recover. Each of these things is simple, but they speak directly to the most fundamental systems in your body. The beauty of these tools is that they don't require perfection. You don't have to meditate for an hour a day or chase sunlight from dawn to dusk. Even small, steady doses change the brain. A few minutes of breathing before a meeting, a walk outside at lunch, 5 minutes of silence at night with no screens or distractions. These small choices don't just make you feel better temporarily. They begin to rewire your stress response. They remind the brain that cortisol doesn't need to be in charge all the time. And when these practices become habits, something else happens. The brain starts to expect them. Just as it learns the rhythm of stress, it can learn the rhythm of calm. With repetition, your nervous system begins to anticipate the relief these practices bring. That anticipation alone can lower cortisol even before you begin, because your brain has learned what's coming: safety, balance, recovery. These aren't tricks. They're how your body was always meant to function. Cortisol is not the enemy. It's simply a signal that has been left on for too long. Breath, light, and quiet are how you remind your brain to switch it off. They don't erase stress from your life, but they give you the ability to meet it without being ruled by it. And in that shift, the body begins to heal. Letting go sounds simple, but it's one of the hardest things the brain can learn to do. When you're stressed, your mind holds on tightly, clinging to worries, replaying conversations, rehearsing possible outcomes as if preparing for every scenario could somehow keep you safe. But this constant grip is exhausting. It keeps cortisol elevated, the nervous system tense, and the mind trapped in loops that never lead anywhere. The science of letting go isn't about ignoring problems or pretending life is easy. It's about training your brain to stop treating every single thought like a threat. Cortisol plays a central role in why letting go is so difficult. When stress hormones are high, your brain's survival systems dominate. The amygdala stays on high alert, scanning for danger. The hippocampus, responsible for putting events in context, gets quieter. And the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that could step back and see things rationally, is dulled by the constant pressure of stress. In this state, your brain doesn't want to release anything. It thinks holding on is the only way to stay safe. This is why letting go feels unnatural at first. You're fighting against the very wiring that stress has built. But here's what's remarkable. You can train your brain to let go, not by forcing it, but by showing it, again and again, that it's safe to loosen its grip. The first step is understanding what happens when you stop feeding stress. Cortisol is not infinite. It rises in response to perceived threats. But if those threats fade, the hormone naturally begins to drop. When cortisol drops, the amygdala quiets, the hippocampus re-engages, and the prefrontal cortex comes back online. Letting go isn't just an emotional experience, it's a biological shift. By lowering cortisol, you allow the parts of your brain responsible for perspective and calm to take over again. One of the most effective ways to trigger this shift is through physical release. The body holds onto tension just as tightly as the mind does. Relaxing your shoulders, unclenching your jaw, and slowing your breath all send signals to the brain that it's safe to let go. This isn't symbolic, it's neurological. When you change the state of your body, you change the state of your brain. Over time, this teaches your nervous system that loosening your grip doesn't mean losing control. It means regaining it. Another powerful tool for letting go is reframing. The brain has a habit of overestimating threats under stress. A missed email feels catastrophic. A mistake at work feels irreversible. But when you deliberately step back and reframe the situation, by asking yourself whether it will matter tomorrow or next week or next year, you give your prefrontal cortex room to challenge the alarm signals coming from your amygdala. With repetition, this kind of cognitive shift rewires the brain to stop treating every stressor as life or death. Sleep also plays a critical role in this process. During sleep, cortisol levels drop, and the brain processes and reorganizes memories. This is why things often feel less overwhelming after a good night's rest. Sleep allows the brain to sort out what needs to be kept and what can be discarded. It's a nightly form of letting go, a reset that gives you the perspective that stress erodes during the day. Even mindfulness, often dismissed as simple or abstract, is grounded in the science of letting go. When you focus on your breath or the feeling of your feet against the floor, you're teaching your brain to redirect its attention. You're showing it that it doesn't have to chase every thought or grip every worry. Each time you do this, cortisol drops a little, and the brain learns something new. It's safe to release. The longer you practice, the more this becomes a habit. The same way stress once wired your brain to hold on, repetition wires it to loosen its grip. This doesn't mean you stop caring or stop solving problems. It means you stop living as if every single thing is an emergency. And as this shift happens, the benefits ripple outward. Your sleep improves, your mood stabilizes, your ability to focus sharpens because your brain is no longer burning energy on imagined dangers. letting go also has a physical effect on the body. When cortisol drops, your heart rate slows, your blood pressure stabilizes, your muscles stop bracing for impact, even your digestion improves, because your body finally leaves survival mode and returns to balance. All of this reinforces the message to your brain. You don't need to stay on guard anymore, you can rest. The science of letting go, then, isn't about effort. It's about creating conditions where your nervous system no longer believes it's in danger. This is why small daily rituals matter so much. A few minutes of slow breathing, a walk outside, a quiet moment before bed without screens or noise. These things are not trivial, they are signals. They teach your brain and body what it feels like to stop holding on so tightly. And as those signals repeat, something begins to change. The grip loosens, the loops of worry weaken. You stop carrying every problem into every corner of your day. It's not that stress disappears, but your relationship to it transforms. You stop living in reaction, and instead, you start living in choice. This is the quiet power of letting go. It is not dramatic, it's not instant. But over time, it rewires the very circuits that stress once hijacked. Cortisol drops, balance returns, and your brain learns something it might not have believed for a long time. You don't have to hold everything. You can put it down. Resilience isn't about never feeling stress. It isn't about becoming unshakable or immune to pressure. A resilient brain is one that feels stress but recovers from it, one that bends without breaking, one that can experience tension without being ruled by it. Resilience is not the absence of cortisol. It's the ability to keep cortisol from running your life. And the good news is, this is not something you either have or don't have. It's something the brain can learn. When stress strikes, your brain moves quickly into survival mode. Cortisol surges, the amygdala takes control, and the rational prefrontal cortex fades into the background. This is the default pattern, an ancient design meant to keep us safe. But resilience is what allows you to step out of that automatic response more quickly. It's the difference between staying trapped in survival mode and returning to balance. And this difference is built on practice, not on personality. One of the most important parts of building resilience is teaching the brain that stress is not permanent. When cortisol rises, it creates a sense of urgency, a feeling that the pressure will never stop. But if you consistently give your nervous system moments of relief through rest, breathing, and deliberate pauses, you break that illusion. You remind your brain that it is safe to return to calm. Over time, this becomes a skill, just as cortisol once taught your brain to stay on high alert. Repetition teaches it how to turn that alert off. Physical routines are powerful in this process. When you exercise, for example, you're not just moving your body. You're signaling to your brain that it can release tension. Exercise lowers cortisol, boosts endorphins, and strengthens the hippocampus, which helps regulate stress responses. This is why even small amounts of daily movement can make a lasting difference. It's not about burning calories or chasing fitness goals. It's about showing your brain, day after day, what recovery feels like. Resilience also comes from the way you think. Stress narrows your focus until all you see is the immediate problem. But the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that puts things in perspective, can be trained. When you practice reframing challenges, you literally strengthen the connections between the prefrontal cortex and the emotional centers of the brain. Each time you step back and remind yourself that a setback is temporary, or that a problem has multiple solutions, you're reinforcing the neural circuits that keep stress in check. Sleep is another pillar of resilience. A tired brain is a reactive brain. When you're sleep deprived, cortisol stays higher and the amygdala becomes louder. But with deep, consistent rest, the brain restores its ability to regulate itself. It prunes unnecessary stress circuits, strengthens memory, and resets cortisol's natural rhythm. This is why resilient brains aren't built in moments of crisis. They're built in the quiet, nightly work of rest and recovery. Connection also matters. Humans are social by nature, and the brain responds to support from others in a way that directly counters stress. When you feel safe with another person, whether it's through a conversation, a hug, or simply sitting with someone who understands, your nervous system calms. Oxytocin, a hormone associated with trust and connection, rises and cortisol falls. Resilience isn't built in isolation. It's reinforced in the quiet reassurance of knowing you are not facing stress alone. But perhaps the most powerful element of resilience is repetition. The brain learns what it practices. If you practice stress, if you live in it day after day, your brain becomes very good at staying stressed. But if you practice recovery, if you create small, regular experiences of calm and control, those circuits strengthen instead. Over time, the pathways of balance become just as automatic as the pathways of tension once were. Resilience doesn't erase stress, but it changes the way stress affects you. Instead of feeling crushed by it, you adapt. Instead of staying locked in survival mode, you return more quickly to a state of focus and calm. This is what a resilient brain does. It bounces back, and every time it does, it gets a little better at it. This is why building resilience isn't about grand gestures. It's about small, consistent choices. Taking a few minutes to breathe deeply, stepping outside to see sunlight, moving your body when you'd rather sit still, going to bed on time even when there's more to do. Each of these is a message to your brain. I am safe. I can rest. I can recover. With enough repetition, those messages become the foundation of a new default state. Not one of constant stress, but of steady balance. And in that balance, something extraordinary happens. The same brain that once lived in survival mode learns how to thrive. The cortisol spikes come and go, but they no longer define you. Your mind becomes clearer. Your body feels lighter. You start to meet challenges without being consumed by them. This is resilience. Not a shield against stress, but the quiet, steady ability to return to yourself no matter how loud the world becomes. Stress is not something you can eliminate. It will always be part of life. Deadlines will come, unexpected challenges will appear, and the world will continue to demand more than feels reasonable at times. But there is a profound difference between living with stress and letting it live in you. One drains you until it rewires your brain around tension and vigilance. The other allows you to face it, manage it, and move forward without carrying it into every corner of your mind and body. This difference begins with how you relate to stress itself. Cortisol is not an enemy, it is a signal. It tells you something needs your attention, that it's time to act or prepare. In short bursts, it's useful. It wakes you up in the morning. It sharpens your focus in urgent situations. But when you start treating every task, every inconvenience, every what if as an emergency, cortisol never shuts off. Living with stress without letting it live in you means learning to recognize which signals require a response and which ones you can let pass by. Your brain is built to adapt, but it adapts to whatever it's given. If stress dominates your days, your brain will reshape itself around vigilance. The amygdala becomes louder, the prefrontal cortex quieter, and the hippocampus weaker. But if you begin to train your brain to meet stress in short bursts and then return to calm, those same neural circuits can rewire in the opposite direction. Cortisol doesn't have to run the show. It can become just one tool among many. One of the most powerful ways to do this is through creating boundaries. Not just boundaries with people, but boundaries for your own nervous system. When you finish a stressful task, your brain needs a signal that it's safe to reset. This can be something small, stepping away from your desk, taking 5 slow breaths, going for a brief walk, or simply sitting in silence for a minute before starting the next thing. These moments are not wasted time. They are deliberate exits from stress mode. Each one lowers cortisol and teaches your brain that stress is temporary, not constant. The body plays an equal role here. When you move, whether it's through exercise, stretching, or even just standing and breathing deeply, you're not just changing your posture. you're breaking the physical feedback loop that keeps cortisol high. Movement sends a clear signal to your nervous system that you're not frozen in danger. It shifts your state from one of quiet bracing to one of release. Over time, this practice prevents stress from embedding itself in your muscles, your breath, and your baseline way of living. Equally important is learning to separate identity from experience. Stressful moments are things you go through. They are not who you are. This distinction matters because when stress feels personal, it lingers. You carry it home. You dream about it. You wake up with it. But when you can see stress as something external, a wave that rises and falls, you stop letting it take root in you. The wave still comes, but it doesn't define the shore it crashes against. This is also why recovery practices, sleep, light, quiet, and connection, are not optional luxuries. They are the anchors that keep stress from becoming a permanent state. Each time you give your brain a real pause, cortisol has a chance to settle and your nervous system returns to balance. Over time, your brain begins to expect these pauses, just as it once expected constant pressure. That shift changes everything. Even your thoughts begin to move differently. When stress no longer lives in you, you stop rehearsing it in your mind. You no longer lie awake reliving every mistake or bracing for the next imagined disaster. Instead, you start to see challenges in context. You solve what you can solve, you let go of what you can't, and because your brain is no longer flooded with cortisol, it has the clarity to know the difference. None of this means stress disappears. It means stress loses its power to settle in and shape who you are. You meet it when it comes, you handle it, and then you return to yourself. That return is the part most people forget, but it's where your strength actually grows. The ability to recover, to reset, to move out of survival mode and back into balance is what keeps stress from becoming a permanent tenant in your mind and body. Living this way doesn't happen overnight. At first, it may feel unnatural to pause between tasks, to breathe slowly in the middle of tension, to walk away from worry instead of following it. But over time, these practices become part of you. And when they do, you realize that stress no longer feels like the backdrop of your life. It comes and goes, it rises and falls, and through it all, you remain steady. That steadiness is what it means to live with stress without letting it live in you. It's not avoidance, it's not denial. It's the quiet, practice skill of returning to balance over and over until balance becomes your default state. Cortisol no longer rules you. Your brain no longer lives in constant defense. And for the first time, stress stops feeling like a permanent condition and starts feeling like what it really is. Just another passing signal, one you know how to hear, respond to, and let go. In the middle of all the rushing, all the deadlines, and all the weight that builds and builds until it feels like stress is the only language your brain knows, there is still something quieter. It's not loud enough to fight for your attention, it's not urgent, and it doesn't demand, but it's there, beneath the noise, under the hum of cortisol waiting for you to notice it. That quiet is what your brain is built to return to. Cortisol was never meant to be the constant background signal of your life. It was designed to rise when you needed it and then fade, leaving space for balance, focus, and rest. But in a world that never really slows down, the volume of stress can feel permanent. You start to think that maybe this is just the way it is, always wired, always tense, always waiting for the next thing. But even in that constant hum, calm has never left. It lives in the small pauses you almost forget to take, the deep breath that lands heavier than the one before it. The moment you step outside and the air feels different, cleaner, brighter than it did indoors. The silence when you turn everything off for a few seconds and realize the world is still moving. But you don't have to keep up with it every second. Cortisol doesn't define your brain. It only reflects how it's been used, and that means you can change it. Every time you slow down, every time you let your body exhale fully, every time you let your mind be still for just a moment, you're reshaping the map. You're proving to your brain that safety isn't gone. It's just been covered by the noise of everything else. The truth is, your brain is not broken. Even if you've been living in a stress for years, even if the tension has become so familiar you hardly notice it anymore, those pathways of calm are still there. They might be faint now, overgrown from disuse, but they have not disappeared, and each small step back toward them, one deep breath, one quiet walk, one moment of stillness, makes them clearer. You don't have to fight stress to find peace. You only have to make enough space for it to show up again. The same way your brain once learned to live on high alert, it can learn to rest. That's what all the science of cortisol, of memory, of neuroplasticity and recovery leads back to. The simple fact that you can teach your brain a new way to live, and it starts small, always small. The pause in between tasks, the choice to step outside and feel sunlight on your skin, the moment at night when you put the world down and tell yourself, not now. These moments are not meaningless. They are how you stop cortisol from running the story. They are how you turn down the noise until, underneath it, you can hear the steady, quiet rhythm of a brain at ease. The calm has been there all along. You don't have to create it. You only have to uncover it, bit by bit, until it becomes the backdrop instead of the stress, until it becomes the place you return to without effort. And once you do, stress stops feeling permanent. It comes and goes like weather. And you remain steady, clear, breathing deep, even in the middle of the noise. And that's where we'll leave it for tonight. You've seen how cortisol touches every part of the brain, how it shapes memory, habits, emotions, even the way we hold ourselves without realizing it. But you've also seen something even more important. None of it is permanent. Stress may leave its mark, but the brain is always listening, always adapting, always ready to learn something new. You can teach it calm. You can teach it balance. You can teach it that not every signal is an alarm, and not every thought needs to be carried. So maybe tonight, as you rest, you let your shoulders drop. You take one long breath that feels heavier than the last. You remember that the calm has never gone anywhere. It's been underneath it all, waiting for you to return to it. And if this helped you find a little bit of that quiet, even for a moment, stay with it. Let your brain have the proof it needs. You're safe now. You can rest. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for giving your mind the space it so rarely gets. And if this helped you, if it eased the noise even a little, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and come back, because there is always more quiet to find, and we can find it together. Good night.